Sup, my fellas, don't forget to leave feedback and enjoy the story. The protagonist thought that he could not become stronger and that he had no talent. He imagined people who were enveloped in mana. The man raised his staff above his head. The protagonist looked at his hand, which had a banknote in it, and noted that he had neither power nor money, because he was the most simple. Looking at the crowd of warriors, he emphasized that he was even a little worse than a simple man. Squeezing his hand with the banknote in his hands, the guy noted that, however, his teacher said that in order to win, it was not necessary to be stronger than the enemy. There was a smile on the protagonist's face. Connor fought with many dragons and thought that in order to win, it was not necessary to be stronger than the enemy, and if he could not become stronger, he would make his opponents weaker. Bright streams of energy enveloped his body. The protagonist saw messages that mortality reduced the defense and defensive abilities of the enemy, and exhaustion gradually reduced the health and mana level of the enemy. Connor's energy hovered around the monsters. There was a magic circle under his feet. Turning around, the protagonist saw a monster swinging at him. The monster hit the ground with its hammer. The protagonist picked up his hammer with one hand. Cracks appeared on the hammer. Connor used Contempt of the Strong, which increases damage dealt to enemies higher than him in level, reducing damage taken from them. A powerful blow was heard in the area. Connor's eyes glowed pink. The protagonist dealt a powerful blow to the monster. He began to quickly run towards him. Connor jumped on the spear sticking out of the monster's chest. The protagonist's face was pleased. Powerful energy began to emanate from Connor. He remembered how the old man pointed his finger and asked him to remember that he needed to make his enemies weaker. The protagonist hit the monster in the face. The old man asked him to destroy the enemies with one blow, adding that there would be no second attempt. Connor suddenly turned around. He began to swing the blade. A whirlwind formed around the protagonist. The old man told him that the main thing is to kill the enemy the first time, because Connor came face to face with a huge demon. The protagonist remembered the words that he was a debuff master with a smile on his face. Standing on a hill and looking at the castle, Connor thought that Brave New World, or BRW, was the largest MMORPG with an open world and virtual reality in the history of gaming. Many people were walking down the street. The plot tells us about a huge and diverse world map with 30 million kilometers of complete freedom. We are shown various locations. We were told that this game has more than 2 billion NPCs, almost unlimited content, and completely recreated sensory systems and graphics. Connor held a staff in his hands. Turning around, the protagonist looked at the guys and thought that BRW was not just a game, but a whole world. But he was not very interested in such things, and the main reason he started playing was money. Looking at the poster of the game, Connor noted that no one would have thought that you can make money just by playing games. The protagonist, covered in blue mana, noted that he had started a year ago and had received the Elementalist Mage class. Connor remembered how he had fought a stone golem and thought that constant leveling had paid off, and he had become a master of the Beamer Guild, consisting of 200 people. The protagonist stood among the guys with a smile on his face. Opening a chest of gold, Connor thought that this would be enough to last for some time. The guy enthusiastically asked how much the protagonist would receive in cash and how he had even managed to find this cool dungeon. Connor, with a grin on his face, replied that there was one way. He noted in his mind that he had neither a good education nor a family, but he had a certain predisposition to games, so no one would stop him from surviving on this. He stood surrounded by the guys and, with a satisfied look, asked them to go, noting that he was treating them. The protagonist, with a smile on his face, winked at the guy and noted that only in this game could he live. Connor was running away from bandits in the forest while it was raining. He turned around and looked at his opponents who were asking him to stop, calling him a fool. The protagonist suddenly disappeared from their sight, and the bandits said that they couldn't see anything because of the rain and he was just in front of them. Connor hid behind a tree next to the bandits who were discussing which way he went, and that in any case he had nowhere to run and they would find him sooner or later. Frowning, the protagonist thought that these were the creatures from Genesis. Connor imagined the people with glowing eyes and noted that the Genesis Guild is one of the greatest guilds in the NMN, which has a lot of influence. Kneeling, the protagonist looked at the fire. He noted that these fools destroyed his guild. Looking up, he said that despite the size of the guild, he did not expect such a significant difference in strength and did not even have time to do anything before they were finished. The protagonist saw messages that he had been playing for 47 hours and that excessive passion for the game could harm his health and interfere with his normal life. Looking at the projections, Connor said that he had nowhere to go. He imagined his room and noted that if he quit the game, his room, a moldy basement room, and an old VR capsule would be waiting for him outside. Looking at his staff, the protagonist reasoned that 100 million credits and a bunch of precious items were collected to confront the Genesis, but everything was stolen by the enemy due to the betrayal of allies. Connor began to study his inventory. Sitting on the ground, he wondered if this was the end. Biting his lip, the protagonist asked why he was not succeeding. His hand began to shake. Connor clarified whether he tried so hard to lose everything. He began to cry and asked why he kept losing. An old man appeared in front of the main character and said that it was because he was weak. Smiling, the old man said that in any world there is a law of the jungle and it goes without saying that the strong will oppress the weak. Standing in front of Connor, the old man said that he felt sorry for the poor guy who complained about the world like that. The main character started to leave and said that he was not in the mood for jokes now. The old man asked how Connor dared to talk to his elders like that. The main character was suddenly taken aback. He saw a bandit who rushed at the old man. A powerful blow was heard in the forest. The guy looked at the bandit and said that he was a fool and they agreed to go together. The bandit replied that it was all because he was slow. The man said with a serious look that the fool really did not log out. Connor sat in front of the old man in a cloud of dust. Holding his hand, the main character thought that he was finished and he did not even have a weapon. Standing up, Connor looked at the old man and asked him to run away from there quickly, adding that it was very dangerous there. Watching them, the bandits discussed that the protagonist was really worried about the NPCs. Simon stood behind them and said that Connor had such a character, he cosplays as a good guy and thinks it's cool. The protagonist was dumbfounded by this. He cried out that Simon was a traitor. Simon spread his hands and clarified if these were too cruel words. He stated with a satisfied look that he was just a man pursuing the best opportunity. Frowning, Connor asked how Simon could do such a thing, noting that he considered him family. Smirking, Simon asked if the protagonist still called them family after all. He said that if Connor really thought so, he would not have opposed Genesis and he sent his comrades to certain death only because he did not want to lose the guild. The surprised protagonist cried out that this was not so. Simon grabbed the staff and asked if Connor knew. Holding the staff in front of him, Simon said that only those whose business prospers become family. Frowning, Connor noted that he was the one who stole his weapon. Simon pointed the staff at the protagonist and said that it was useless in his hands anyway and that he would use it wisely. He was preparing for a powerful magical attack and asked Connor to test the power of his weapon. There was a powerful explosion. The guy, looking dumbfounded, said that the protagonist was crazy and they ate from the same table after all. Simon replied that that is why he must destroy him so that he could not rise to his feet again. Connor said that they were bastards. Simon was taken aback by this. The old man with a serious look said that no matter how much he had fallen, you cannot stab your benefactor in the back. Lightning came from the old man's hand. He said that such trash, in the person of Simon, cannot be recycled. Connor was behind the old man and called him. Simon, dumbfounded, asked who he was and whether he had parried his attack. Clenching his hand into a fist, the old man asked if that was what he called an attack. He sent a powerful stream of mana at Simon and offered to show him how to do it. The protagonist covered his face with his hand from the powerful gusts of wind. The ground in front of them was destroyed. A magic rune appeared on Connor's hand. The old man stood in a cloud of dust. His eyes glowed brightly. Messages popped up that it was an NPC, an old man by the road, level 999. The frightened protagonist screamed that this couldn't be. Looking at the old man, he asked if he was almost level 1000. The old man seriously noted that he had been watching him for a long time. Looking at Connor, who was coughing up blood, the old man said that he had no talent, no money, not even an ounce of luck. He imagined the protagonist standing on the battlefield. Connor was furious. The old man said that he really enjoyed watching him fight desperately. The protagonist suddenly looked at the notification. He saw a quest that he needed to respectfully bow to the old man by the road, but he had to bow very carefully, otherwise the old man would beat him to death. The dumbfounded Connor thought that the quest itself was simple and epic. The protagonist emphasized the fact that he did not know what would happen, but he would definitely not get such a chance again and he had no reason to refuse. Connor bowed his head and asked to be accepted as a disciple. Streams of energy were hovering around the protagonist. He saw messages that he had become a disciple of Deus and had successfully made the transition. His class had been changed from Elementalist Mage to Disciple. An old man approached him and said that this literally meant that he had become a disciple of the Great One. Stretching out his hand, the old man said that by becoming one, he would reveal to him the secret to invincibility. Surprised, Connor began to talk about invincibility. A drop of sweat was running down his face. The protagonist shook his teacher's hand. Magic circles appeared under them and pink energy began to hover. Stunned, Connor noticed that this was teleportation magic. Suddenly, a pink flash appeared. The plot takes us to the center of Mount Kunlun. A pink beam was shining in the mountains. The protagonist put his hand on the ground. Sitting on the ground, Connor thought that even high-ranking players cannot always use teleportation magic. The old man turned around and asked Connor to follow him, adding that they were going to a place where he would teach him. Connor, surprised, began to follow him. Standing in front of a lake, the protagonist told his teacher that it was very clean. Vincent replied that it was and that it was the Lake of Liberation, which would help him purify himself. Vincent stood next to him and said that he was not going to bother with him and that they would take a crash course in 99 days, and that this lake of liberation would help them with this. The protagonist's reflection was visible in the water. Vincent walked towards him and asked him to take his words literally, noting that a new vessel needed to be filled with new contents. He kicked it and stated that, moreover, it was too dirty. The protagonist began to fall into the lake. The water began to splash. Covering his mouth with his hand, Connor thought that he was going to die. While in the water, the protagonist wondered if he could breathe. A notification appeared that the Lake of Liberation would purify him. Surprised, Connor saw a warning that he was in for incredible pain. The protagonist suddenly started screaming in pain. Looking at the lake, Vincent assumed that judging by the scream, the water treatments were really refreshing. Connor began to feel pain in real life and wondered that his body and he felt like every cell in his body was burning. He wondered if the system allowed such severe pain. The protagonist extended his finger and was about to press the exit game button. He suddenly stopped. Connor had memories of himself kneeling and running away from bandits. He was covering his little sister's eyes. He was walking up the stairs with bricks on his back. The protagonist frowned at this. Enraged, Connor thought about how he couldn't escape. Bubbles were visible in the water. When the timer ran out, the protagonist emerged from the water. He crawled onto dry land and said that he survived. He cried out with a satisfied look that he had succeeded. A blue projection suddenly appeared in front of his face. Connor saw that the purification was complete and the player's character was reset. The dumbfounded protagonist asked again. He began to tremble and said that his level. Vincent said that the purification was successful. Turning around, Connor asked what to do now, noting that his level had returned to the very beginning. Vincent threw a towel on his head and noted that just an hour ago, he was ordinary trash. Surprised, Connor clarified if Vincent was talking about the moment they met. Vincent replied that this was true and his level of strength, endurance, mana, everything was wrong. With a smile on his face, he asked how the protagonist could hope for something with such a disproportionate level of characteristics. Holding his head, Connor mentally wondered if his level had reset because he had been leveling up incorrectly. Vincent imagined the outline of a man and said that he was going to disassemble him from head to toe and pull out all the best parts. He imagined how people's stats were increasing and noted that, in other words, when other players received 1 unit of mana, he would receive 1.2. Taken aback, the protagonist wondered if it meant that at level 100, everyone else would receive 100 units of mana. He was already 120. Looking at the walls of the cave, Connor turned to the teacher. He knelt down, bowed his head and cried out that he bowed before him. Vincent noted that in this way he would soon erase the holes on his knees. Turning around, Vincent said that in any case, it was too early to rejoice and that he had a long way to go before he became the best among all. Vincent, with a calm face, said that over the next 99 days, he would have to repeat the same actions 100 times. The protagonist began to shout that he could do it. He enthusiastically declared that if he managed to become stronger, he would never give up. Turning around, Vincent smiled and said that he hoped that his mood would not change. Connor watched him go. A quest appeared in front of the main character that he needed to pass Vincent's tests. The plot takes us to the same time, to the USA, to the headquarters of the Hive Company. People were standing in front of a huge blue screen. A surprised man said about the epic code 007 was activated. People were scared by this. People approached the man and asked who Vincent chose as a student. The man assumed that someone ordinary. The guy came to them and noted that they were talking about an ordinary player. He stood quietly and asked to enlarge the picture. The plot introduces us to the deputy chairman of the Hive Company, the head of the Hexagon department, Fred. Looking at the data of the main character, Fred said that this is really the most ordinary user from Korea. Fred, with a smile on his face, said Connor's name. Looking at the face of the main character, Fred noted that he wondered how long he will last. Connor looked at the screen in surprise and thought that he wanted to escape from reality. He stood in front of the castle and noted that this is why he was in a brave new world. The protagonist looked at the castle burning down and emphasized the fact that this place was not much different from real life. Connor looked down and thought that in a moment of despair, when he thought that reality had nothing to do with it, it was just him and he was a loser. The dumbfounded protagonist looked up. Vincent stood in front of him and extended his hand. Connor told us that he had a teacher and having received hope, he began to train hard to become invincible. The protagonist swam in the water while lightning struck him. Vincent inserted many needles into his body. He dodged Connor's attack. The protagonist climbed a rock. A strong snowstorm began in the mountains. Connor noted that 3 months had passed like this. Vincent raised the glass to his mouth and began to drink. Vincent happily exclaimed that he never thought the day would come when the student would pour him a drink. Sitting at the table, Vincent announced that tomorrow would be the 99th and final day. He asked Connor if he had already started to miss Mount Kunlun. The protagonist held a shot glass in front of him and said that he would never miss the place where he had almost died due to grueling training. Vincent said that he had only been training for 3 months and what's more, he had given him a day off. Connor remembered working on a construction site and thought that on his day off, he had been working hard in real life to cover part of his debt. Light was visible from the windows of the house. The protagonist asked if Vincent was like him. Vincent was surprised by such a question. He put the glass down and said that of course he had times like that in his quest for power, but he was not such a scumbag. Connor said with a displeased expression that he couldn't get away from it. Vincent sat opposite him and said that 500 years ago there were 8 strongest people on the continent. An outline of 8 people appeared in his mind. There were gusts of wind around Vincent. He said that he was the weakest among them. His fist was bloody and he noted that he had an irresistible desire to destroy them all, but they were much stronger than him. There was pink energy around Vincent. He said that he went to Mount Kunlun and began to train hard and eventually he managed to gain great power, but he was still unable to defeat those 7. The protagonist asked with a serious expression if they were really that strong. Vincent replied that it was not so and that they had simply all died of old age in the 500 years he had been on the mountain. Connor asked again, dumbfounded. Vincent stood outside and looked around. He put his hand inside his shirt and said that as a result, the enlightenment he had gained during cultivation had become useless. He threw a book on the table. Vincent asked if Connor knew what the word invincible meant. Holding the book in his hands, the protagonist asked if it was someone who was unmatched in strength. Vincent walked towards him and said that it was not true and that an invincible person was someone who never lost, no matter how much force they used. Connor asked if victory was about being stronger than your opponent. Looking at the surprised protagonist, Vincent stated that in order to win, it is not necessary to have a physical advantage and he simply needs to make the strong weaker. Looking away, he said that this is the enlightenment he has achieved. Vincent emphasized the fact that the Debuff Master has a beginning and an end. Pink mana enveloped Connor's body. A message popped up that he passed the training and successfully made the transition and now his class has been changed from student to Debuff Master. Looking at his hand, the protagonist asked about the Debuff Master. Connor saw that his nickname was changed to Jackfried. Looking at the projection, the protagonist asked about his nickname. Vincent, with a satisfied look, said that he is the one and only disciple of the Great One and in this case, he needs an appropriate name. Stunned Connor thought that in DNM you cannot change your name, but the system changes the rules at its discretion. Clenching his fist, the protagonist noted that he felt like he had been reborn and with this power, he could defeat even Genesis. Pointing his finger, Vincent said that since he had become his disciple, he had to do something. Vincent said with a serious expression that he was sure that the 7 fools he had spoken of earlier had produced grandchildren before they lay in their coffins. A message popped up about the teacher's request that he defeat the descendants of the 8 strongest people who ruled the continent 500 years ago. Connor saw a list of all the descendants. Folding his arms, the protagonist cried out that no matter who his opponent was, he would defeat anyone and prove that his training was not in vain. Vincent snapped his fingers with a serious expression and declared that he liked his aspiration and his training was over. Pink mana enveloped Connor's body. Vincent cried out that now he must take his place and become great. Smiling, the protagonist noted that he had gone. A pink beam began to glow from the roof of the house. Looking at the glass, Vincent noted that he thought that they would drink more. The plot takes us to the west of the continent, to the kingdom of Burma. Sunlight enveloped the castle. The protagonist walked through the forest and said that he was thrown far away. He stood in front of a cut-down tree and thought that this was even better, adding that he was only level 1 and did not want to face fools from Genesis at all. Sitting on a log, Connor reasoned that he should freely upgrade to at least level 100. The protagonist began to study his class information, equipment, and Debuff Master skills. Holding his hand to his mouth, Connor said that a powerful blow is an active skill, mortality and exhaustion, apparently debuffs. He began to read that mortality is the creation of a circular field centered on the caster, which destroys the enemy's armor and reduces the effect of defensive skills. The area of the field increases as the skill level increases. Connor saw the message that exhaustion is the creation of a circular field centered on the caster, which exhausts the enemy, reducing their health and mana. The area of the field increases as the skill level increases. It is a type of fixed damage that increases proportionally to the amount of mana of the caster, so the skill is not affected by abilities related to defense and anti-magic. Looking at the projection, the protagonist was very surprised. After getting up from the log, Connor was stunned and asked if not only defensive abilities, but also anti-magic will not affect the debuff and what's more, fixed damage depending on the amount of mana. The furious protagonist thought that he was already waiting to try it. The hamster held onto the bars and screamed that he did not want to die. Turning around, Connor saw a tiger running towards him. The hamster in the cage was in the tiger's mouth. The protagonist saw a hidden quest that he needed to save the Great Spirit and defeat the mutated tiger. The dumbfounded Connor asked if this hamster was the Great Spirit. Looking at the tiger, the protagonist read that it was a level 25 mutated tiger that had mutated under the influence of an unidentified energy. Connor noted that this monster was too high a level for the starting location. The protagonist saw a stick under his feet. He grabbed the stick in his hand and thought about what the teacher had said. No matter how strong the enemy was, the main thing was to make him weaker. A pink field surrounded Connor and the tiger. The tiger was dumbfounded by the mana flows. The protagonist hit him in the face. Connor had a smile on his face. The enraged tiger released its claws from its paw and began to roar loudly. The protagonist dodged its attack. Standing to the side, Connor began to strike the beast. It was heading straight for him. The protagonist ducked from the swing of its claws. The surprised hamster watched the fight. Watching the battle, the hamster thought that a level 1 human had desperately rushed into battle with a level 25 mutant and was fighting him on equal terms. The frightened hamster began to scream and asked Connor to win and save him. The protagonist thought with a serious expression that he found it hard to believe that even after 10 strikes, the tiger still had half its health. The tiger's eyes were glowing brightly with a red light. Looking at the stick in his hands, Connor noted that his strength and mana were already at their limit and the weapon would soon break too. He grabbed the stick with both hands and noted that if he did not destroy the tiger with the next strike, then he was finished. A blue aura enveloped his body. A message popped up that the powerful strike ability deals a powerful blow to the enemy. The tiger and Connor locked eyes. The protagonist suddenly jumped up. The tiger was flying at him. Connor dodged the attack with a serious expression. He pointed his stick at the beast's face. A powerful blow was heard. The tiger's teeth were knocked out. Many level up notifications popped up. Looking at the scratch on his sleeve, the protagonist said that he had reached level 15 at once and he didn't know if it was worth fighting, being on the verge of death every time. Looking at the beast's corpse, Connor said that he had defeated something he couldn't before and that was what it meant to be a Debuff master. The enraged hamster asked him to stop standing there like a pillar and get him out of there. Sighing, the hamster said that he was alive and thanked the protagonist. Stretching out his hand, the hamster with a satisfied face said that he wanted to thank him, but he thought that he might be lonely on his journey and he was very generous, so he would keep him company. Connor started to walk away from him and said that he would manage. The hamster grabbed his leg and started screaming that he had lost his memory, so he had no powers now. Frowning, the protagonist said that he was not interested in pets. Connor saw a message that he had completed a hidden quest and received a contract with the Great Spirit of the Forest as a reward. Looking at the projection, the protagonist thought that he had heard that the Great Spirits were similar in power to the Spirit King. Standing still, Connor noted that even if this hamster was useless now, as soon as he got his power back, the hamster held his leg and cried. The protagonist offered to make a contract, noting that he had a lousy mouth, but he was pretty cute. The happy hamster asked if it was true. A golden chain tied Connor's hand in the hamster's body. A notification about the Great Spirit of the Forest popped up. Holding his hand to his chin, the protagonist noted that if his level was directly related to it, then he would become stronger if he leveled up. A hamster stood in front of him and said that since they had made a contract with him, he needed to introduce himself properly. The hamster said with a satisfied look that his name was Promptus Cactus Hydra Levy. The protagonist said that this was too long a name. He saw a notice that he needed to give Emja to the Great Spirit of the Forest with whom he had made a contract. Connor said with a satisfied look that he would call him Coma from now on. The hamster was taken aback by what he heard. Coma crossed his arms with a displeased look. Walking through the forest, the protagonist asked Coma to make his face simpler. Coma asked how he could call him by such a name. Smiling, Connor said that he thought it sounded cute. Coma cried out that this was not a suitable name for a great spirit. The protagonist replied that he could not change his name anymore. Connor asked why the Great Spirit was locked in a cage. Coma's face was serious. Closing his eyes, he replied that he himself did not know. He remembered being in a cage with bewilderment and said that when he woke up, he was already locked in it. Coma started pulling his cheek while the protagonist said that something incomprehensible happened to him. Coma started shouting loudly that this is why Connor should help him get his memories back. The protagonist stopped and asked him to take his time. Looking at the settlement, Connor emphasized the fact that their main task now is to become stronger. Sunlight enveloped the building. The man crossed his arms and greeted the protagonist. The plot introduces us to George, a member of the mercenary guild. Smiling, Connor said that he wanted to get a mercenary license. He thought that he needed it for leveling up. Pointing his finger, George said that getting a license requires the necessary conditions. Even if he is great, he still must confirm that he has minimal competence. Stunned, George said that once upon a time, rabbits in the territory of Burma mutated in. Connor placed the claw on the table and asked if it would do. Looking at the claw, George asked if it was a mutated tiger claw. A message popped up about the claw, saying that due to its strength and durability, it is used as a material for making low-grade weapons. The protagonist asked with a satisfied look if this was not a better way to prove his competence than killing a rabbit or a squirrel. George replied that he was right, but he found it hard to believe that he had defeated a tiger on his own. Smiling, George said that it was impossible. The dumbfounded protagonist asked again. Putting his hand inside his bosom, George said that there were enough checks and he would issue him a license. Connor thought that he did not think he could do it. George pulled out a token and said that it was a mercenary guild license. Standing opposite, George asked if the protagonist would listen to the story. He said with a surprised look that there had been a lot of mutants lately. Looking at the crowd of people, George said that they had recently attacked a neighboring ranch and the villagers were in fear. Looking at the villagers, Connor asked if it meant that monsters had started appearing in the village more often. George replied that it was true and that the mutated tiger he had killed had been there a couple of times. George introduced several monsters and emphasized the fact that the mutated tiger was not the only one terrorizing them and that the wolves and the bull that had become monsters were also a threat to the villagers. Connor seriously noted that he had been wondering why the location was level 20 and now he could see what was going on. Upset, George asked to help them. A message popped up about the quest defending the Kingdom of Burma, and they needed to help the Kingdom of Burma until the situation was resolved. Looking at the projection, Connor said that his level was too low to help them. George said that he was ashamed to say this, but the protagonist was the only person who managed to cope with the tiger alone. Inspecting the settlement, George added that, in addition, their village is in the wilderness, so to get outside help, they will have to wait about a week. Inspecting the notice, Connor thought that he usually does not take on such tasks, but it smells like you can level up there quite a bit. Holding his head, the protagonist said that he understands this. He said with a smile on his face that he will help them. The plot takes us to the same time, to the castle of the Kingdom of Schreier, located near the Kingdom of Biermann. There were many corpses of people on the floor. A wounded man lay on the ground and said that he asks. An axe was swung in front of him. The man's head was cut off. The stranger thought that he told him not to look up and people are very stupid, but there is no reason to worry. A grin appeared on the monster's face. He noticed with burning eyes that they would be ruled by someone who was much superior to them. Someone thanked them for visiting their establishment and wished them all the best. Koma was chewing something and saying that, wow, man, before that he looked like a poor tramp, and now he was just a tramp. The hero replied that he was being cheeky again. Koma jumped on his shoulder and the guy said that, well, he can't walk around in rags forever. It flashed through his mind that this weapon would be enough for him. He held the weapon in his hands and the hamster said that so, the shopping was over, now it was time to eat. The protagonist asked in shock what he meant by eat. After all, he had just bought him magic stones and that he had eaten everything. Koma angrily said that such low-grade stones did not satisfy his hunger. Connor exclaimed that at least he knew how much he had spent on it. The hamster looked at the hero furiously. Men were walking towards them and one of them asked that he was the one who killed the mutated tiger. The man extended his hand and said that he was glad to meet him. His name was Oscar. He would be his comrade in the upcoming mission. He introduced Greg. Then he said that this was Ron. It flashed through his mind that these were the mercenaries George had spoken of. They shook hands and the hero said that his name was Connor, nice to meet you. The guy said that he was counting on him, the leader. The protagonist asked again that he was the leader. Oscar said that usually the strongest becomes the leader. They had never defeated the mutated tiger. The hero thought that it turned out that they wanted him to do all the work for them. Connor replied that it was good. Greg said that so, their squad was formed. What would they do next? The protagonist replied that George asked to protect the king from wolves and a bull. The guy turned around and continued that they would start with the Bookert Ranch since things were the worst there. Biermann Kingdom, Bookert Ranch. Oscar yelled tensely and told Greg to act. He furiously pierced the wolf with his weapon. The guy sat down on the ground and said how hard it was. Greg said in surprise that it was heading here. Oscar asked in confusion what was heading here. A huge mutated bull, level 25, was mutated by an unidentified energy. It rushed forward. The protagonist made blows and shouted to run. A moment later, he turned around. In his hand, a weapon was shining. A powerful blow deals the enemy a powerful blow. He swung in front of the mutated bull. Then he cut the air and struck. The bull flew far back. Signs about leveling up appeared, that he had reached level 20. Connor thought, damn, there are too many people here. He can't use the Debuff skill in front of them, and that it would be better to hunt alone. Ron called the hero and asked if he was okay. Connor turned around and said yes, like the others, and that he saw the bull run away in the direction where the people were. Oscar replied that he was a tank, so he got off with bruises. But Greg, there was no threat to life, but he would be out of action for some time. They answered that that's it. Oscar said that, by the way, he killed the mutated bull alone. Impressive. And it turns out that the rumors about the tiger were true. Connor replied that, well, what are they? He was just lucky. A voice with bright red eyes said to go back. The wolves turned around abruptly. The animals fell behind the warriors. They all rushed in one direction. The guy said that all the monsters escaped. This is considered a successful completion of the mission. He continued that it was strange and that the mutants rushed into the forest at the same time, as if someone had given them an order. He looked into the forest and said that maybe that was the case. The board said that it was an investigation. Category, regular quest, description, need to find out what caused the animals in the forest to mutate, progress, 0%, reward upon completion, 200 gold, no precautions. The hero turned around and thought that it was another quest. It seemed that it was not just about clearing out monsters. Connor walked and said that they should return first. He wanted to keep an eye on the mutants. Oscar asked if he could handle it alone. The guy answered affirmatively with a smile and said that he was also the only one who was not hurt by the attack. Koma told them not to worry, he would help him. Oscar said that that's how it was. Ron thought he was cute. The man touched the ground and it flashed through his mind that he thought so, that they were working together. He continued the thought that however, on the other side is the kingdom of Schreier. The hero looked at the tracks and wondered if the monsters had decided to attack another kingdom. Someone called the protagonist. Connor replied that he was wondering where he had gone, and he was having fun here. Koma said to look there. They looked at the castle and the hero said that this was the castle of the kingdom of Schreier. The voice said that there was not a soul here. The door opened. Connor's eyes widened. A tiger with a monster on its back came out of the castle and animals approached them. Nate smiled. This is a legendary goblin that appears once every 100 years. Race, goblin. Rank, boss. Class, goblin lord. Attributes, lightning, fire, skills, mind control. Can only be used on monsters. The protagonist was shocked and thought that this is a goblin lord, and even with a mind control skill, it turns out that all mutants are his doing. Koma asked him what he understood now and what they would do. The guy replied that first they needed to go back. In a situation like this he couldn't handle it alone. The sunset was shining with bright colors. The barracks of the Biermann kingdom. Someone asked to introduce himself. The man said his name was Chuck. He was the commander-in-chief of the soldiers of the Biermann kingdom. Connor shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him. Chuck replied that he had heard a lot. George highly recommended him. He continued that it was a pleasure to talk to him, however. Chuck said that the situation was urgent, so he suggested getting straight to the point. He put his hand on the map and said that from what he had said, it looked like the Schreier kingdom had fallen to the goblin, and that they thought he was involved in the mutation of the animals. Connor replied that he was sure of it, and that the goblin had used his skill of mind control over animals to take over the Schreier kingdom. He continued that now he intended to attack Biermann. The guy said that if the man's words were true, then their kingdom was finished. They couldn't resist the goblin. The guy told Chuck that he thought he could still save the villagers by sending them to a shelter. The man thought about it. Oscar raised his hand, apologized for saying such a thing, and said that the kingdom of Schreier was literally next door. Why didn't they know about it falling until now? Chuck frowned and said that unfortunately they weren't on good terms with Schreier, and what's more, they had no means of communication. The protagonist said that they were probably busy defending themselves from monsters, so they couldn't find time to investigate. He continued that the Goblin Lord was most likely trying to create a situation in which the kingdom of Biermann would be isolated. The goblin grinned evilly. Chuck frowned and said that their kingdom, which had stood for 300 years, would really be destroyed by a goblin. He slammed his hand on the table and continued, and how should he tell such a thing to the king? Connor turned to him and said that there is always a way out. The man angrily exclaimed, what kind of way out? The guy replied that he was not 100% sure, but if there is time, everything can work out. Chuck asked what time they were talking about. Connor replied that it was time for him to grow. The voice said that the plan was very simple. He continued that they would use archers to hurt the mutants. He said that and then lure them to a place. The warriors ran from the beasts as fast as they could. The guy said that he would be waiting there. Connor said that he would destroy everyone in the trap. The protagonist continued that having reached level 30, he would join the others in the battle with the goblin. Chuck thought about it and said that pumping meant that those who came from outside could level up much faster thanks to the Transcendence rune. He continued that however the goblin was level 50, and even if he reached level 30, the difference would still be colossal. Connor replied that yes, he was right. Then he said that he had managed to destroy the tiger, the difference with which was more than 20 levels, so defeating the goblin was possible. The guy continued that even if he failed, he would at least gain time for reinforcements to arrive. Chuck closed his eyes. The guy called the commander-in-chief. He exhaled. He said that it was good, he would trust him. The board said that the crushing of the Goblin Lord. Category, normal quest. Description, you need to crush the Goblin Lord Nate. Progress, 0%. Reward upon completion unknown, no precautions. Koma called the owner and said that he was interested in something. Connor apologized and said that there was no money to buy food. The hamster asked furiously, what does food have to do with it? The hero asked, so he wanted to ask. Koma looked at him and said that when he talked to that bald guy, he hid something from him. The guy asked how he found out. Koma said contentedly that he was still a great spirit, he easily notices such trifles, and let him not ignore his abilities. Connor answered that simply by reaching level 30, he will open a new skill. In front of him was written that a powerful blow, contempt of the strong, control speed. The hero said that this ability will greatly help him in the fight against Nate. Of course, there is no guarantee that he will win in 100% of cases. The hamster asked why he hides this skill. The guy answered that he does not want to reveal it yet. He continued that there are other players here if they find out about his abilities, and that rumors will spread very quickly. The guys talked to each other. Koma said that people like to live, inventing work for themselves. Connor replied that it was better to live like this than to constantly get beat up by life. Ron turned around. Oscar called the hero and said that he had already finished talking to the commander-in-chief. The hero answered affirmatively and continued, but what to do, and that it seemed that he was behaving too self-confidently. Oscar told him not to worry and that they were grateful to him for agreeing to go on the quest with them. He stretched and said that by the way, they wanted to rest and go to sleep, and whether he was going to quit the game. The protagonist replied that yes, they were planning to start the plan to destroy the goblin in 2 hours, he would also go and rest. The guy said that was good, and that they would see each other later. Koma called the owner and asked if he was leaving too. The hero replied that he would be back very soon, and for now let him gnaw on this. The hamster enthusiastically exclaimed that the owner was generous, and thanks for that. Then he said incredulously to wait, and that he had said he had no money. Connor replied with a smile that he had lied. He pressed the button. The board said that it was a brave new world. The end was in progress. The hero took off his glasses from his face. He was sitting in the room and saying how tired he was. The guy got up saying that he needed to eat something else. He lay down on the bed and said that although he had very little time, it would be better to sleep. He continued that if you think about it, so much had happened. His guild was destroyed, after which he went on the run. Images of the past flashed in his memories. He met a teacher and received a hidden class, a Debuff master, and now he was fighting monsters to protect the kingdom. He played only for money, and now he enjoyed the game. The guy smiled and asked if he had finally started to like it. The voice said that he could not wait to enter it again. He wanted to become stronger and enjoy all the delights of free play. He got out of bed saying that he couldn't stand it and could level up before the quest started. Someone greeted him and said that they needed Mr. Connor. The hero turned around. He asked who was there. There were men standing in front of him. One of them asked that he was Mr. Connor and that they had come to install the capsule. The hero asked again, puzzled, that they were asking for a capsule, but he hadn't ordered anything. There were boxes in front of him. The guy asked if it was true, that this was the address given and that his name was Connor. The guy replied that yes, that was true, but he would repeat himself, he hadn't ordered anything. The man handed him a piece of paper saying that their task was to deliver and install the capsule. He told him to take this. The letter said that the epic code was 00 selenium, and congratulations. It flashed through his mind that they were talking about his class. He continued the thought that he had heard that the hidden class gave huge advantages, so this capsule was sent from the main office of the DNM. The man pursed his lips. Then he said that gentlemen. The hero said with a smile that they were probably tired doing their job and offered to treat them to a drink that they wanted. The men answered that they would have coffee. A man was standing around the corner and talking on the phone. He told the boss that yes, they were at Connor's, they would start installing the equipment now. The voice said that good work, Manager Louis. Louis asked that, however, does he know why the chairman made such a gift to Mr. Connor, and whether they knew each other? The man answered that he had no idea. He asked that maybe Mr. Connor had the same hidden class, and that they would think that they were comrades. He had already seen the capsule in an advertisement. The guildmaster starred in it. Nickel pressed the button in the advertisement, VR Capsule Org, the capsule that ordinary players cannot afford. Now it stands at his home. The hero ran around the chair and said that they gave him the ogre for nothing, that they were completely crazy, and so this is what the hidden class has. He put on his glasses and said enthusiastically that there was no time to waste, that he would be able to get some sleep in the next world, and that he couldn't wait to try the capsule. His thoughts flashed through his mind that what a feeling it was. He could already feel the difference from the old capsule. His body felt comfortable, and that he didn't even feel like he was in the capsule. The hero thought that, and everything seemed so real. He felt warmth and the smell of burning. The hero asked again about the smell of burning. An entire village was burning in front of him. Wolves attacked a warrior. Goblins viciously pierced people's bodies. The protagonist looked at what was happening in bewilderment and asked what the. Someone shouted to save the Great Spirit. The wolf was furiously running after the hamster. The guy asked about him. Koma was screaming that he couldn't run anymore and that the life of the Great Spirit would end here. The hero swung at the beast. It widened its angry eyes. Koma breathed a sigh of relief. Then he called the owner, who was standing with his boot on the wolf. The hero asked the hamster if he was hurt. The animal pounced on him, saying that he was an idiot, why did he come only now, and that he thought he was going to die. He grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and told him to calm down and tell him what happened. Koma asked what, and he himself didn't see. The animal began that as soon as they all left. He continued that the goblin and the army of mutants attacked the kingdom. They were caught off guard. The hero thought that the damn bastard waited until the players logged out. He said that wait a minute, there were no players except him. Koma shouted that yes, that was why there was such chaos here. The hero answered that it was great, he wouldn't have to worry about anyone seeing his abilities. He told the hamster with a smile that he had a task for him. Koma thought with fear that he didn't like it. The goblin licked the blade of his sword. Two furious wolves stood in front of him. The warriors were covering the people with themselves. The guy thought that damn, there were civilians there, and that it seemed to him that they had evacuated everyone. He continued to think that it would be difficult to take them to the shelter now. If there were a couple of monsters there would be a chance. The guy cursed in fear. He wondered if this was the end. The goblin ran into the guy. A moment later, he was knocked down by the weapon. It was covered in the blood of the defeated goblin. Bright flashes thundered and the weapon returned to the protagonist's hands. The board said that a powerful blow deals the enemy a powerful blow. The protagonist ran into the creatures. He dealt another blow. The guy said in shock that it was the same. The hero said that he knew what happened. Connor said to take the remaining residents and evacuate with them. The warrior frowned and replied that they could not dump all the work on a mercenary and that they would help. The voice said that thank you, of course. The guy widened his eyes. The board said that mortality reduces the enemy's defense and defensive abilities. Exhaustion, the enemy's health and mana level gradually decreases. A bright magic circle appeared under the protagonists. The hero said that it was more convenient for him to fight alone. The warrior asked in shock what the guy said that he understood. He handed him something, saying that he should take it, and that it was nothing special, but he might need it. The protagonist thanked him. The warrior shouted that they would take the remaining villagers to the shelter and wish them luck. It flashed through the hero's mind that nothing would happen if he showed his abilities to the NPC, and that he had used them just recently, but it still felt strange. A moment later, the hero's eyes widened. The wolf sank its teeth into his weapon. The goblin was approaching him from the other side. The hero brushed the animal aside and dodged the goblin's blow. Then he said with a smile that apparently mortality had a good effect on them. The goblin rushed at him furiously. The voice asked why he had lost his balance. The hero continued, why didn't he run if it hurt so much? He had struck. His leg slipped. He continued that although the guy grabbed the monster's head, he said angrily that he would not have let him go just like that. His eyes were burning with rage. The hero said with a smile that the new capsule felt completely different. He can see the enemy's movements much more clearly. The monsters were flying towards the guy's back. Of course, thanks to training with the teacher, he had become much better at moving, but now, it flashed through the guy's mind that he could dodge any attack. The wolf opened its mouth in fear. The voice said that he had never met players with money who played really well. He continued that the newest capsule in their hands was absolutely useless. Flashes pierced the animals. It was a triple kill. The scoreboard said that leveling up, he had reached level 22. It flashed through the protagonist's mind that it seemed to him that he had killed a large number of monsters, but he had only risen to level 22. Yes, after level 20 it becomes more difficult. Koma was rushing towards the protagonist with all his might and calling him. A bunch of monsters were running after him and Koma asked if that was enough. The hero smiled and replied that well, even though leveling up is difficult. He continued that the main thing is that there are many enemies around him. The wolves flew at the guy and a magic circle appeared under him. The voice said that this rat from the outside world returned. The goblin continued that he was furious. Nate continued that apparently he was a threat, and if he was not stopped now, he would become a thorn in one place. He said that unlike those who were nothing, the goblin was sitting on the throne. Chuck looked at him tensely. The man thought that the rat from the outside world. Did he really mean the protagonist? He held his sword tightly and thought that then he would need time to level up. This green creature should not be released from here under any circumstances. Chuck shouted that he was going somewhere, let him fight him, or he chickened out, and that he would make a pie out of him. The goblin said with a smile that he chickened out. A man who could not protect his king calls him a coward. He held the old man and said to try to save this old man, and that he was even interested to know how long he would last. Chuck frowned and thought that he did not have long left. An image of the hero appeared in his thoughts and he thought that Connor should hurry. 30 minutes ago, Koma shouted in bewilderment that he did not want to. He continued that he was a great spirit, not bait, and moreover, what would he do if he was captured? The hero answered that they had no choice. He wanted his master to be a loser who did nothing but run away from danger. He continued that they would also leave. All the people here would die. Koma shouted that he should not be dragged into his fights. The guy extended his fist to him, saying that but he was not alone. This was their battle with him. The hero asked the great spirit Koma with a smile. He exhaled. He gave him a fist bump saying okay, but don't forget to make him some treats after it was all over. They said sure. Present tense. Koma frowned and the hero apologized to him. The hamster sat on his head and said that he almost died running away from the monsters, and that's it. Next time he shouldn't even think about asking him for help. The hero replied with a smile that their Koma was such a good guy, but he understood that they had no choice. He continued that at least they had destroyed everyone who was dangerous and could rest. Koma told him to know that it was all thanks to him. The monsters were lying in a heap behind them. The guy opened the bottle and asked what about his other requests. Koma asked him about the Goblin Lord. He hadn't seen him personally, but he was definitely there. Connor asked him to continue. He said that when a crowd of angry mutants and goblins was chasing him, he was running past the castle. Koma's eyes widened in shock. He said that a terrifying aura was emanating from him. Koma continued that although he could not get inside, he could say with certainty that the Goblin Lord was in the castle. The Goblin Lord had captured the castle. When attacking a kingdom, such a high-ranking person as the king must leave the castle. How strange. Moreover, the commander-in-chief was not visible at all. The hero began to walk. He said that they should hurry. Koma asked that they were already leaving. Connor turned around and said that yes, the castle could be dangerous, so let him stay here, and that he would return soon. Koma looked at him with satisfaction. He turned around at the lying monsters. Then he said in fear that it seemed that someone moved. A voice shouted for him to stop, and that he was with him. The hero approached the castle and said that this was the castle of the Biermann kingdom. It flashed through his mind that he also felt a terrifying aura emanating from inside. Then he continued the thought that it would be dangerous to just go and walk through the front doors. Connor turned around and said that by the way. He asked the hamster what he was doing there. The hamster replied that he wanted to go with him. The guy said that he had said that it could be dangerous here. Koma replied that he was just scared. That is, how could he let him go alone in such a dangerous place? Connor would answer that he was about to burst into tears. The hamster climbed onto his shoulder and asked, so what, does he have a plan? The hero asked again what plan. The animal replied that even though he had become stronger, the Goblin Lord himself sat in the castle, and what would he do if his attacks did not work on him? Connor replied that sometimes he said sensible things, but they did not have time. He crouched down and said that more than that. Then he quickly flew forward and screamed that sometimes it was better to act without a plan and fly in with a foot. Someone screamed shrilly. Koma flew next to the protagonist in fear. The guy landed. The little animal said that he was crazy, didn't know how the doors worked. He could have just opened them and walked in. Connor asked to be quieter. A moment later he said what was there. He said in surprise that Sir Chuck. The man said that he knew that he would return. The protagonist ran up to him and said that his hand, what he was doing here and why he hadn't evacuated. The man looked at him and replied that despite everything, he was a knight, he was obliged to protect his king to the last. Connor thought furiously that it turned out that the king was also in danger. Someone said that it was him, the man who was putting a spoke in his wheel. The hero looked away. The Goblin Lord stood in front of him. He continued that he was the only person who had lasted so long against his monsters. Now it was clear why this pathetic insect was stalling for time. He pointed a weapon at the guy. He asked again. Nate laughed and said not to pretend. The goblin said, did he really take him for an idiot? He continued that these knights fought until their last breath to give him time to become stronger. The hero glared. Nate said that, but what was the point if they died in vain? Chuck shouted for Connor not to listen to him. They were just doing what they had to. The guy called Chuck. The voice continued that the man lying there was a king. Chuck replied that yes, there was an old man's body lying on the ground. The protagonist said to sit there and not twitch. Chuck called the hero and told him not to give in to his provocations. Connor walked towards the goblin. He laughed and asked why he decided to attack him. His pride overshadowed his mind. The goblin swung his axe, saying that this is why they, insignificant humans, deserve to die. The hero frowned and used speed control, reducing the speed of movement, attack and spell casting. Magic circled around the monster. The goblin grinned and said that he missed, an accident, or was it planned? The hero called him with a smile. Then he continued to remove his dirty tendrils from the hand that he holds, and the goblin's hand was Chuck's hand. The goblin grinned furiously and said that no one. He shouted that he dare not order him. The goblin flew at the guy. Connor jumped up. Magic was flying in the air. It surrounded Nate and he flew away. The monster landed and thought that his miss was not an accident. He became faster. Magic flew around his body. He continued to think that no, he slowed down, such a disgusting feeling as if he was not able to control his body. Magic turned into chains. The goblin screamed furiously. What did he do? The guy held the king in his arms and said that the speed control skill is better than he thought. Chuck called the guy. The hero handed him the hand, saying that this is his hand and that it will not be possible to attach it back, but it seemed to him that it should be his. Connor put the king on the floor and continued that Chuck and the others sacrificed themselves to buy him time. Now he will make sure that their sacrifice was not in vain. The guy told the animal that it was enough to hide and to take them away from here. Koma replied that it was good. Chuck stood up and thanked him for his help, then said that but this is the king, could he pull him more gently? Koma pulled the king and said that it was enough to whine, let him walk faster. Connor thought that so, the most important thing he did. He looked away and continued the thought of what was left. The hero thought that he should destroy this bastard. The goblin said that he not only killed his mutants, but also took the prey and that the man should not expect mercy. The voice said that now he could relax. The hero held the magic chain in his hands. He smiled and suggested having fun. The goblin, gritting his teeth, tried to break the shackles. Swinging his axe, he went to the protagonist, but he managed to dodge. Connor with all his might delivered several lightning-fast blows to the body of his opponent. He, writhing in pain, looked down, and then, letting out a drawn-out roar, he hit the protagonist with the handle of his weapon with all his might. He, trying to get up, thought that the speed control ceased to work on him. Even if he had a good stat, the difference in levels made itself felt. The goblin, approaching him, smiled, asked what was wrong with his face, where did his pomposity go? Showing his teeth wide, he added that he really thought that he could defeat him. He was incredibly stupid. Laughing, he continued to say that he would not kill him just like that. First he would cut off all his limbs, and then impale his head on a spear. Connor stood up and thought that this was incredibly annoying. But the goblin was right, he wouldn't get far with just speed control, he needed skills to attack after all. A system window appeared in front of him, and he continued to think that moreover, speed control took up too much mana if he had known that this would happen. Frowning, he thought that he would have used that skill. The system message began to disappear. Connor rushed to attack, saying that he should wait for a better moment, to which the goblin shouted that he had decided to stop fighting like a rat. The goblin extended his hand forward, asking if maybe he had another trick up his sleeve. A second later, their weapons slipped. Connor felt an incredibly strong recoil in his hand, to which the goblin laughed, saying that he liked the look on his face. Extending his axe forward, he continued to tell him to pull his head out of his ass already. The protagonist held his mace out in front of him, trying to block his attacks. The goblin, looking menacingly ahead, said that even if he was a little smarter, he would never defeat him. A second later, he grabbed Connor by the throat with all his might, and then threw him into the wall. The protagonist spat out blood. The goblin, approaching him and stepping on his stomach with his paw, said that he knew that people like him had treated goblins as an inferior race for many years. Looking menacingly ahead, he continued to say that he acknowledged this, they, goblins, are not a superior race by nature. With his foot on the protagonist's body, he added that everything will change, one day they will force humans and all the superior races. An image appeared in his mind, how he sat on a tiger in front of his army, and then he added that they will bow their heads to the goblins. He smiled widely and said that this was the wish of a goblin lord for life, different from a lazy mercenary who pursued pathetic goals. Connor smiled and replied that he was a retard, but his wish would remain a foolish dream. Looking at the frightening expression of his opponent, he continued to say that because goblins have always been and will always be a dirty inferior race if he takes a shower. The lord clenched his weapon in his hand and then said that he thought these were his last words. Swinging his axe, he added for the insect to disappear from this world. Connor, frowning, thought that now was the time. Blue chains appeared around the goblin, and the protagonist deactivated the speed control. Moments later, a large explosion occurred. The lord, looking ahead with displeasure, thought that his body suddenly became much lighter and his weapon was stuck. Feeling the protagonist approach him, he wondered if the little rat did it on purpose. A few seconds later, Connor dealt a huge number of blows. Swinging his mace, he hit the lord on the chin. Suddenly, the goblin turned around and whistled loudly. Connor looked ahead in surprise. A moment later, a huge tiger appeared from behind the wall and knocked the protagonist down, throwing him back. He fell to the floor. The goblin took a few steps forward and said that Connor almost broke him. Turning around, he added that he was very surprised. A glow began to emanate from his hands and he said that this would be the end of it. Smiling, climbing on his pet, he added that with the true power of mind control, he would create the most powerful mutant that would tear him to pieces. A moment later, the tiger rushed forward. He struck with all his might with his paw, smashing everything into pieces. The protagonist flew into the wall. Seeing this, the goblin, smiling widely, shouted that he should think that it was out of spite, since such a castle would become his grave. Looking forward, the protagonist replied that he was the one who dug his own grave. A magical scale appeared behind him, and he replied that, calling him a slacker. A system message appeared that the contempt of the strong was activated, the damage dealt increases, the damage received decreases. Looking at his opponent, Connor replied that he was not a slacker. The Lord looked ahead in fear, and Connor replied that he was a master of debuffs. A second later, a huge pillar of light pierced the goblin and his monster through and through. Connor added that he was the one who would climb to the top of this world. A system message appeared in front of him that he had completed the quest to protect the kingdom of Burma. The sun went behind the hills. We are transported to the castle. Finally, this long day is over. Connor looked at the dead body of the goblin and his pet. Looking at it, he thought about what had stopped working after the Lord's death. Someone hit the little goblin on the head with a hammer. The warrior exhaled, looking at the defeated monster. The remaining monsters were destroyed by the arriving players. The city began to gradually rebuild. The surviving residents, those who were slightly injured, began to work on restoring the kingdom. Someone was designing a house. Connor was sitting near the tent. Holding an apple in his hand, he exhaled, "Yes, how good." Raising his head, he added that the potion that literally brings back from the dead is incomparable to anything. In reality, such a thing cannot be found. Smiling, he thought about how he still did not believe it. Remembering his battle, he continued to think about how he could defeat the Goblin Lord alone. If he did not have enough mana, he would not be able to use the skill Contempt of the Strong. Remembering how he activated it, he thought that then the castle would become his grave, and, of course, we are talking only about death in the game. A system message appeared in front of him, which contained information about the skill Contempt of the Strong. He thought that the greater the difference in levels, the stronger the effect. This is one of the best debuff skills. However, since the down lasts for 12 hours, it must be used wisely. Looking at the system message, he thought that, moreover, it will be difficult for him to fight, constantly hiding the presence of abilities. Suddenly, someone approached him and asked that he can already walk. The protagonist smiled widely, greeted his comrade. A bald man appeared in front of him, who replied that, apparently, he had already recovered, and this is incredible. The protagonist stood up, answering that he just needed to rest longer, to which the guy replied that he was already tired of lying around doing nothing. Moreover, his master ordered to take Connor to the castle. Hearing this, the protagonist replied that how he feels, it seems that he was badly battered. The guy stepped forward and replied that, thank God, he had arrived in time, otherwise he could have died, and that the gentleman was now receiving treatment and was feeling much better. Smiling broadly, he added that he had always had a reputation as a strong man. Connor looked at his friend's bandaged hand in surprise. Stopping, he said that if he had come earlier, he would not have lost his hand. The guy turned around and replied that he had nothing to apologize for. On the contrary, he was very grateful to him. Touching his severed hand, he replied that they had survived and were still walking this earth only thanks to him. A severed hand was a small price to pay for protecting the kingdom. Hearing this, Connor smiled and replied that he really was a real knight. The bald guy exhaled and told them to stop. They needed to go. Stepping forward, he added that everyone had been waiting for him. We are transported to an old man, his body shaking, and he says that he is the hero who saved their estate. He is the owner of these lands. Connor came closer and introduced himself, to which the Baron replied that he has a strong name. It is worthy of such a hero. Falling to his knees, he added that he has no idea how grateful he is to him for saving their estate. The protagonist replied that he should not do that. Suddenly, something crunched in the Baron's back. He fell to the floor and guards ran up to him. Connor, turning to his comrade, asked that he was sure that he had a reputation as a strong man. The Baron, lowering his gaze, replied that he was apologizing. Then, crouching down, he added that he still felt unwell. In any case, he was grateful. Connor, looking ahead, replied that he was not worth it. After all, he was doing his job as a mercenary. The Raven's behavior puts him in a position. The old man, looking ahead, replied that it didn't matter whether he was doing the work or helping on his own initiative. What mattered was that he sacrificed his life to protect their estates. If it weren't for him, this beautiful, peaceful place would have fallen into the hands of the vile goblins. Looking at the protagonist, he added that he should follow him. He had prepared a gift for him. Hearing this, Connor, smiling widely, thought that he would finally receive a reward for the quest. He quickly ran after the Baron, thinking that given the difficulty level, he thought the reward should be appropriate. We are transferred to the dungeon, with the Baron moving along the dark corridors. Looking around, he thinks that this is the place where he fought the Goblin Lord. He didn't even notice how huge the hall is. Stopping, he thought that there was something like an altar. Suddenly the Baron said that this treasure room, built by his ancestor, who loved to collect antiques. Taking a small box, he added that most of it was sold or destroyed, so there was almost nothing here. Returning, he threw the box back, saying that, however, there was something truly valuable left. Suddenly, a bright light poured out of the box. Connor looked in front of him in surprise. A scroll appeared in front of him, and he said that this was a coupon for using the Mercedes workshop. An image of a wizard and a blacksmith appeared in his head. He thought that since ancient times, the continent is a kind of magic, alchemy, and blacksmithing. Over the millennia, technology has developed and become so closely related to each other. A bright flash appeared in front of him, and he thought that the border was blurred, and a merger occurred, thus artifacts appeared. He imagined a huge number of weapons, armor, and magic items, thinking that the combination of magic, alchemy, and the blacksmith department. At the moment there are several large workshops specializing in artifacts. We are transferred to the Autotronic Technical Workshop. Then the Vemorian Murder Workshop appears in front of us. After that, the Mercedes Workshop. Imagining all this in your head, he wondered that people called and still call these three workshops the best of their kind. Looking at the burning scroll in front of him, he thought that the coupon for using the Mercedes Workshop was a reward for completing the quest with the Goblin Lord. He opened his mouth wide, and a system message appeared in front of him that this was a workshop upgrade coupon. Any artifact could be upgraded 12 times in a row with a 100% chance. No level limit. The price was 1,000 gold, after which he thought that 12 workshop upgrade coupons, and even with a 100% chance, was too generous a reward. Suddenly, the Baron approached him and said that it happened 700 years ago. He imagined a small house, adding that when the Mercedes workshop first opened, it was experiencing financial difficulties. In desperation, the owner decided to sell coupons for 1,000 gold. Of course, this was a lot of money. No one wanted to invest in the nascent workshop, which was still a hole at the time. It was his ancestor who came to the workshop's aid. The man with the white mustache bought this coupon. The Baron turned away and said that he did not know if he had foreseen the future or was simply a lover of collecting junk, but it was the best investment he had ever made. Turning around, he added that in any case, it seemed that this coupon had finally found its owner. Connor, looking ahead, replied that this was too generous a gift. By today's standards, one such coupon is worth hundreds of millions of gold, if not more. The Baron replied that it belonged to no one. Imagining the coat of arms in his head, he thought initially he had planned to leave the coupon as an inheritance to his son's family. Exhaling, he added that, as it turned out, he was a weakling. Connor thought that he did not have an ounce of strength either. The Baron, looking at his coat of arms, added that he had a request, he would be able to fulfill it. Remembering what he woke up in, he said that when someone dragged him by the collar out of the castle, he said, his eyes wide, that he could see his unwavering, determined gaze. He remembered Connor glaring ahead. Clenching his fist, he added that he was sure that he would become the strongest hero on the continent. Looking at Connor, he continued to say that when that happened, he should promise to help his son. Smiling, he continued to say that, like his ancestor, he wanted to invest in him, the hero. After all, he was a supporter of strength and common sense. Looking at the coupon, Connor asked how he could refuse after that. Smiling, he replied that it was fine, he would take care of his son. A system message appeared with a promise to the Baron. It was a normal quest. The protagonist left the dungeon. He looked at the ticket, asked what he should do with it. He imagined a huge pile of money, saying that he could sell the coupon at auction and get at least a few hundred million, maybe more, which would allow him to pay off his debts and buy his mother a new house. Imagining a threatening teacher who shouted that he was an idiot, that he couldn't see the forest for a couple of trees, he thought about what if he were here. Smiling, he said that he would say something similar and beat him up to boot. Putting the ticket in the system window, he said that he should think about the future, let him save it for now, he could get money for it at any time. Connor looked away in surprise, said that, by the way, where was he keeping his helmet? He hadn't seen it all day. Frowning, he added that he hoped he hadn't gotten into trouble again. We are transported to the house. The hamster looks up in fear. He turns around and starts shaking his body, saying that this is enough. The man, looking at this, folds his arms and replies that he dances well. His daughter danced like that when she was little. Coma replied that he would repeat himself, he does not dance for free. A moment later they threw him a nut, replying that it was good, such kindness should be paid for, let him take a treat. The hamster replied that he was grateful, what else could he show them? Unlike his foolish owner, they generously appreciate his talents. A second later he heard the protagonist's voice in fear, who asked about the foolish owner. He grabbed the little hamster by the collar and then said that he was worried about him. It turns out he was here all the time. He had become a dancer. Coma shouted, what else could he do with such a good-for-nothing owner? If he wasn't going to buy him treats, then he shouldn't even think about getting them. Connor, looking at him, answered with displeasure that didn't he only eat magic stones. Coma answered that magic stones tasted like sand. He only ate them when he needed strength. The man at the table said that this was their hero. He looked around where he had been. The protagonist, approaching the table, answered that he had been doing some business in the castle. The guy, stretching out his hand to him, answered that he was always busy. Had he already received a reward for the quest? Connor, smiling, answered that he hadn't yet, to which the guy said that in this game he had received such a big reward for the first time, his friend would be kicking himself for running away. The protagonist, looking ahead, thought that he shouldn't tell them about the coupon, it would be better for him to continue to rejoice. A man came up to them and said that Connor had finally arrived. The man picked up a bag of gold and said that he was fine, he was glad that they were safe and sound, the building renovation had ruined him, but he thought it was time. He held the bag out to the protagonist and added that, as they had agreed, 5,000 gold. Connor apologized and replied that if he had broken anything, it was by accident. The man came closer to him and whispered that he had heard that he had received a special reward in the castle, and that he should not worry and that the other mercenaries did not need to know about it. The protagonist replied that he was grateful for his understanding, after which he put the bag on the table and added that he could ask him something. He approached the man and said that when he arrived at the castle, the Goblin Lord's corpse was no longer there. Where had they put it? The man replied that, most likely, the corpse was by the lake. Presenting the torn corpse, he continued to say that the master had hung it to show the goblins who had managed to escape what fate awaited them if they returned. Looking ahead in fear, he added that he had seen the message briefly in the morning and it was not a pleasant sight. The protagonist exhaled and thought that the Baron was a complete show-off. Looking away, he continued to think that it was time to say goodbye to the estate. Looking around, he thought that so much had happened in such a short period of time. He had managed to level up quite a bit. The teacher knew that this would happen, so he sent him here. Smiling, he thought that thanks to him, he had a good start. Suddenly, someone stepped forward. The master appeared. He loudly shouted, "Apprentice." Everyone in the bar immediately grabbed their ears. The man, looking ahead with displeasure, said that he was almost deaf, who had drunk so much beer since the morning. Suddenly the protagonist, looking ahead with fear, wondered what that deafening loud voice was shouting about the student. Was it really the master? We are transferred to the street. The guy, looking ahead, says that he sees someone with such a high level for the first time. Connor, breaking through the crowd, says that he should go. After which we look ahead with confusion. A healthy man appeared in front of him. Looking at him, Connor thought that this was not a teacher. The man opened his mouth wide and shouted that they finally met his student. The protagonist looked ahead in surprise for a few seconds, after which he pointed at himself. The hamster sitting on his shoulder asked what his teacher was. He looked incredibly strong, to which Connor replied that he was seeing this man for the first time. It didn't look like he was a stray or a madman. After which he opened his eyes wide. A system message appeared in front of him, saying that the rune of insight had been activated. Then another system message, saying that this was a named NPC with a human race. His level was 361. The man smiled widely and asked what he saw, who he was. Then he began to take out his sword behind his back. He waved it, saying that he was also a great one of the 5 heavenly stars. A bright flash blinded the entire street. Connor, looking ahead, wondered what he hadn't heard. He imagined a map in his head and continued to think that the 5 heavenly stars was a title given to the 5 strongest players on the continent who had reached the master level. It was a very rare occurrence to meet one of the stars in such a remote place. Remembering how he met the master, he thought that he had also found him in the wilderness of the forest. Perhaps only in such places do such NPCs spawn. The man approached him, after which he asked that it was good that his teacher had such a body. The antagonist recoiled, answering that why did they continue to call themselves a teacher, to which the man replied that he was wrong. If he was his student, then he was his teacher. Laughing, he added that, apparently, he was very young, he knew so little about the world. Pakishlifov, he added that he probably heard about the 5 heavenly stars, but did not fully understand that he would tell him. Suddenly, the protagonist answered that he knew everything, and the master looked ahead in surprise. Connor stretched out his hand and said that the 5 heavenly stars are the 5 masters of the continent, possessing incredible power. Hearing this, the master asked with displeasure that how could he know what was with his reaction. The protagonist frowned and apologized, saying that he was a little late. A second later, the teacher's aura appeared behind him, and he said that he already had a master. The man jumped back in fear, after which, looking ahead in surprise, he asked what of it, let him leave him and become his disciple. Hearing this, the protagonist, smiling, replied that in his place he would choose the expression, his teacher was much stronger than him. He taught him the secrets of invincibility, to which the man replied that he was stronger than him. He wanted to say that his teacher was one of the 3 honorable ones. The protagonist, smiling sarcastically, replied that no, he was even higher. The master, raising his head, asked that there was someone higher than the 3 honorable ones. Connor replied that it seemed he did not know yet. Raising his finger, he added that he was talking about something great. The man turned pale. Then, exhaling, he smiled and asked what he was talking about great. Clutching his sword, he laughed, saying that it was incredibly cute. Then he hit the ground with all his might, causing a strong push. Menacingly looking ahead, he said that great is him. A system message appeared in front of Connor with an urgent quest. He needed to win a bet with one of the 5 heavenly stars. In case of defeat, he would have to become his disciple. The plot shows us John at the age of 26. He held a huge sword on his shoulder. John cut a tree with his blade and thought that in his youth, he paved the way with his sword. blue mana emanated from his blade. He launched many powerful attacks. The aged John tried to catch his breath with a serious expression. He cut down many huge trees and thought that all the training filled with sweat and blood resulted in him achieving the mastery he had strived for at the age of 120. The elves watched him in anger. John emphasized the fact that despite this, nothing could fill the emptiness in his heart. As he walked across the bridge, he noticed that this emptiness was inside him. Looking up, John wondered why he did not feel joy if he had received what he desired so much. He suddenly saw the boys training by the river. He watched as the boy trained the boy and told him that he should relax his shoulders and focus. John was suddenly very surprised. He imagined himself standing back to back with the boy and noted that all those perfect techniques would mean nothing if he died and he needed an apprentice to pass on his knowledge to. He thought that since then his journey across the continent in search of a student began. Looking at the guy with a blade in his hands, John said that he was good at mana, but his combat sense was terrible. Looking at the shirtless guy, John said that this guy had no backbone and such a person would not achieve anything even if he trained every second. Looking at the grave, John wondered if the cart had hit such a talented man. Clutching his head, the frightened John thought that in order to raise an apprentice, he would need at least 20 years and he was already 130 and he could die without finding an apprentice. Looking at the map, John emphasized that he had already been everywhere and there was only one place left. Standing in front of Connor, he said that his last hope was there and as soon as he saw him, he immediately understood everything. Pointing his finger at the protagonist, John cried out that this intolerable boy definitely needed a teacher in his person. Enraged, Connor asked what they were all saying, adding that he would not be his apprentice. John sighed with a displeased look and said that he was not so generous as to offer his knowledge to just anyone. If he really did not want to become his apprentice, he should win the bet. The embittered protagonist thought that this was a very stubborn old man. Looking at John, who had a smirk on his face, Connor mentally asked what he should do, noting that he would not be able to fight someone so strong. An urgent quest appeared in front of the protagonist, that he needed to win a bet with John, one of the 5 heavenly stars. In case of defeat, he would have to become his disciple. Connor began to warm up and asked what kind of bet. Turning away, John said that the protagonist should hit him. Connor was surprised by what he heard. Standing with his back to the protagonist, John emphasized that he would only have one attempt and he could use any means of attack, and if he dealt him at least 1 unit of damage, then he won. John stood quietly and asked Connor not to worry. Smiling, he said that since the protagonist was weak, he would not use defensive skills. He enthusiastically shouted that his body was already trained to the limit, he had no weak points. The protagonist asked with a serious expression if John would use the sword. John cheerfully said that if Connor was not confident in himself, he could give up right away so as not to waste time. The protagonist asked if John knew his name. John looked away and said that the name was not that important and they would figure it out as they went along. Connor grabbed the weapon and said that if John did not want to know his name, then he was not interested in him as a person and he just needed a vessel into which he wanted to pour his knowledge. The protagonist used several of his abilities. Standing under the magic circle, Connor cried out that he would not become his student even if he had to die. John grinned and said that such a thing should only be said after he defeated him. Connor smiled and asked him not to worry. He rushed at John and said that he did not even think that he could lose to him. John was reasoning with a satisfied look that the main character's plan was obvious. He was trying to pour all his strength into one part of the body and, using debuffs, hit him, but such tricks would not work with him. John clenched his hand into a fist. He was preparing for a collision and thought that he would be able to block the attack, since he would easily understand where the blow would be aimed. John was suddenly taken aback. He saw that the debuff was applied to his groin area. Connor was furious. John, dumbfounded, began to scream in pain. A powerful blow was heard. The villagers were standing in the street and said that they had made some kind of bet and nothing was visible behind the layer of dust. Smiling, the guy asked if they were sure they were on the same level. George replied that considering that Connor had defeated the Goblin Lord alone, this was not true. George was surprised. John stood quietly in a cloud of dust. His face was impassive. Looking at John, the protagonist stated that he had trained every part of his body to the limit, but missed the most important one. Sighing, Connor saw a message that he had completed the quest and was offered to receive a reward. Shifting his gaze, the protagonist emphasized that winning the bet really meant completing the quest. He pressed the button that he wanted to receive a reward and said that he would prefer to receive a reward not related to this old man. Shocked, Koma clarified what was going on. Holding him in his arm, the protagonist asked if he was okay. Koma said that his head was still splitting from John's scream. Connor sighed with a smile on his face. He began to walk away from John and said that he would not bother them anymore. Taken aback, the protagonist said that he was going to do something. Koma said that he was going to go to the place where the Goblin Lord's corpse was. Connor cried out that it was true and he needed to get some of his blood before the body decomposed, adding that it would fetch a lot of money. Shrugging his shoulders, Koma emphasized that the protagonist was a marauder. Walking through the forest, Connor replied that he would prefer to call himself a person who thought about the future. Moving through the rocky terrain, the protagonist thought that these were the Sohak ruins of the Magellan Kingdom and that it was there that the level 500 Python monster appeared 30 years ago. Looking around the ruins, Connor noted that it was a popular hunting ground for adventurers from level 40 to 60. Many people were standing on the street. The protagonist emphasized the fact that the mercenary guild was also located there. Many people were standing in the crowd and shouting that they were looking for a teammate. The upset girl said that she was looking for partners. The guy with the blade in his hands asked if there was a place for him. The girl replied that they were actually looking for a buffer. The guy was taken aback by this. The girl bowed and apologized. She thought with a displeased look that there were so many people there, but not a single buffer. The excited girl noticed that everyone she had met before had gathered there and they were all in a similar situation. She noted with a sad look that today she could forget about hunting. She was suddenly surprised. Looking after Connor, she noted that she was seeing him for the first time. Blue mana began to flow from her hand. A blue aura enveloped the protagonist's body. The girl was shocked. She grabbed his hand and called out. Connor turned around in surprise. Smiling, the girl asked if the protagonist wanted to join their party. He pressed the button on the ATM. The door of the store opened. Warming up, Connor thought that he was done with everything in the Biermann estate, so he decided to do some business in the real world. Sighing, the protagonist noted that he was mainly busy paying off debts. He said that he had 200 million in credit at the bank and 100 million in debt at the loan office. He asked how much interest had accrued there. He imagined angry men and said that creditors were now completely unheard of and before they would show up at his house almost every day. Walking down the street, Connor said that no news was good news and that they should never call him again. The protagonist suddenly turned around. He saw a guy driving a car with a girl. Connor, puzzled, wondered how much such a car cost. He began to think that he had earned a lot of money on the quest with the Goblin Lord and he was very lucky since low-level players do not come across quests for which they can receive such a generous reward. He presented a lot of papers and noted that the NM in this regard is not very similar to the real world with its possibilities. Connor noted that after level 200, a huge number of quests appear that allow you to get expensive and rare items. He imagined himself fighting a huge monster and noted that there is also an opportunity to create a business by helping low-level players. An image of a guy holding a cup over his head appeared in his head and emphasized the fact that you can become a professional gamer. The guy fought monsters. Connor thought that a sociable person can simply become a streamer. Looking at the car, the protagonist thought that any development will somehow bring him income, but now he has nothing but a VR capsule. Connor imagined himself standing next to the car and said that one day he will be able to afford a beautiful car and live in a luxurious penthouse. Looking at a tall building, the protagonist said that later he will meet a beautiful girl and be able to marry her. The girl with a smile on her face asked if Connor would go to the party with them. Koma looked at the dumbfounded protagonist and asked why he was standing there like a pillar. A scared Connor replied that he was thinking and asked her to repeat what she said. The girl stood in front of him and said that they were looking for a buffer in their party. The protagonist thought that she somehow saw his class and it seemed to him that the master of debuffs was a combat class. He asked for forgiveness with a serious look. Koma hit the protagonist in the face and screamed that they would join their party. Koma held his cheek and noted that Connor was stupid and she was a solid green flag. Koma stood on his shoulder and asked if he was going to remain a sullen loner, noting that he literally just imagined growing old with this girl surrounded by grandchildren. Connor, looking displeased, said that he only had debuff skills. The girl approached him with a cheerful look and said that their damage dealers would be only happy if you weaken the enemies. She innocently asked if Connor would join them. The confused protagonist looked at her. There was a bright light in the room. The warriors were walking down the street. The plot takes us to the western edge of the Sohak ruins. Connor stood behind the team. Looking at the projection, the protagonist thought that there was once a prosperous kingdom on this place, but 30 years ago it turned into ruins after an attack by a python snake. Connor imagined a picture of a snake and noted that the python was defeated, but a huge amount of mana from its corpse soaked the ground, causing a huge number of monsters to appear. Holding his face, the protagonist suggested that this is why this place is popular for hunting. Holding his hand to his mouth, the guy asked Mary if Connor's level is too low, noting that he has not even reached 31. Smiling, Mary replied that they would be fighting and that he just needed to stand behind and debuff the monsters. She asked him not to worry, adding that she would protect him. The guy sighed with a serious expression and said that he did not understand whether she was kind or naive. He had never been in a party with a debuffer, he did not even know if something would come of it. Mary winked at him and said that it was almost impossible to find a buffer now. However, they should try today. Mary was suddenly taken aback and dodged a powerful attack. Surprised, Connor thought that this was one of the monsters born with the help of Python mana. He looked at the lizard, from which an electric aura emanated. A message popped up that the lizard was a spirit-type monster created by Python energy. They only attack in packs, so you can't let your guard down. Frowning, Mary ordered everyone to prepare for battle. She screamed for the tanks to block the monsters running towards them. The guys took their weapons in their hands. Turning around, Mary addressed Connor. She asked him to stand behind and put a debuff on the lizards. The protagonist accepted her order with a stone face. The lizards began to shoot waves from their mouths. The guy reflected all the attacks. He swung his blade, which created an air vortex. The girl stood behind him and screamed that even if he was a tank, he should not think that he was invulnerable. The guy said that he was not taking significant damage and he would survive. He seriously noted that it was hard to fight without a buffer and a healer. Looking at Connor, he thought that this trifle could be dealt with without him. He mentally asked what was the point of bringing the protagonist to them. There were many sights on the guy's body. He said that he had done his job and they should finish so they could go look for the next target. He was suddenly surprised. Many shots flew at him. The guy was electrocuted. The furious girl saw the guy fall and read the message that the player lover of beauties was killed. The girl was scared. There were a huge number of lizards in front of the guys. The dumbfounded girl asked how many of them there were. Looking around, Mary screamed that they had to retreat. She thought with a serious expression that she had never seen so many of them. She took out the papers with runes on them and noted that they had overestimated their strength and there were only 4 of them left. There was no choice, they would have to use them. Keeping his hands in his pockets, Connor asked to give it to him. Sighing, the protagonist asked why waste the scrolls of return in vain. Turning around, Connor noted that he was not mistaken about her. Looking around, the protagonist said that Mary was very kind and generous, but sometimes she acted too stupidly and she should use the scroll of return only for herself when she was in real danger. Mary asked how she could run now, leaving everyone behind. Taking his hand out of his pocket, Connor asked why he would run now. Snapping his fingers, the protagonist said that it was not dangerous at all. The guys were surprised. A magic circle appeared under them. Connor said that he had imposed debuffs. Mary was shocked. Grinning, the protagonist said that they could have fun. The guys began to fight the monsters. The guy smiled and shouted for them to attack. A powerful blow was heard. The guy launched a series of attacks at the lizards. Looking back, he shouted that it was very simple and the monsters died from the simplest attacks. Connor clapped his hands. Sitting on the pillar, he stated that he understood that they were having fun, but they should not forget that the attack level of the monsters was the same, so if they were not vigilant, they would die like a tank. Grinning, the protagonist thought that this was much more fun than he thought. He noted that he could simply level up while sitting in a safe place. He looked at the many messages with a satisfied look that he had gained experience. Connor wondered if he should continue doing this and get a reward for practically nothing. The surprised protagonist turned around at Mary's scream. She blocked him from a powerful attack. Mary looked at Connor and asked if he was okay. The protagonist imagined Mary fighting and thought that she was very agile and if she chose the rogue or archer class, she would have achieved greater results. Looking at her back, Connor emphasized the fact that the mage class was definitely not for her. The protagonist saw a notification about leveling up. The guys looked at the projections with a satisfied look and said that they all got a level up and if anyone saw this, they would think they used cheats. Connor approached them and asked if they enjoyed the hunt. Holding his hand to his mouth, the protagonist assumed that they weren't very happy that he joined their party, but he was glad that they thought differently now. The guy ran up to him and said that he believed from the very beginning that he would become an integral part of their team. The girl said that it was really something new. It turns out that having such a person in the team is much better than hunting with a buffer or a priest. The enraged guy asked how the girl could compare Connor to these mudbloods. The protagonist thought that they were suck-ups and now he understands why all buffers are arrogant. Their constant praise is given to people like them. Smiling, the girl noted that she first met someone with such a class. She asked with a surprised look if this was some kind of hidden class. Holding his head, a puzzled Connor said that if he had a hidden class, he wouldn't be hanging around there and he would already be in a large guild and earning huge amounts of money. Standing in front of the guys, the protagonist said that he had some kind of unique class and apart from debuffs, he was not capable of anything. Connor presented various emblems and noted that all classes are divided into 4 levels. It is almost impossible to distinguish them until a certain point. Sighing, the protagonist mentally assumed that he had overdone it with skills and in the future, he should be more careful. Mary ran to Connor and called him. She held out her hands, in which were jewels, and said that during the hunt they collected crystals and this is for him. The protagonist saw a message that the lower crystal of light, this crystal formed from the energy of a python, contains weak energy of the attribute of light. Connor, dumbfounded, said that it was a lot. Mary replied that usually after the hunt they give part of the loot to the buffer and that it was his share since the hunt was successful thanks to him. Reaching out for the crystals, Connor said that in that case he was very grateful. Mary grabbed his hand. She asked with a smile on her face if he agreed to continue hunting with them. The protagonist came to the conclusion that these crystals were a bribe. He sighed with a slight smile. Holding the crystals in both hands, Connor said that he was too lazy to constantly look for new parties to hunt. Mary began to shout that the protagonist agreed to stay with them in the party. The guys began to jump for joy. Looking at them, Connor said that sometimes it is useful to take a little break from all the fuss. Koma noted that the protagonist agreed only because of her. The plot tells us that a week has passed since Mary joined the party. We are transported to the Intervention Inn in the Sohak Ruins, a haven for adventurers. Standing in front of the huge building, Connor said that they would be staying there today and everyone was great. Taking hold of the door handle, the protagonist mentally noted that there were no big events or quests happening there like in the Biermann estate, but it was still a good place to level up and unlock new skills. He walked around the room and looked at Koma. The protagonist emphasized the fact that he had even managed to achieve small results. Connor sat down on the couch and Koma asked if he was going to go back to his place. The protagonist replied that he was and he couldn't let the skills he had learned go to waste. He looked at a handful of crystals and said that he absorbed the crystals he got after hunting thanks to his new skill. A blue aura enveloped him. A message popped up that attribute absorption was activated. A bright light began to emanate from the crystals. Connor closed his eyes, enveloped in light mana. He noticed that he had reached level 35 and had learned a new skill, attribute absorption. A message popped up about attribute absorption. This is an auxiliary skill that allows you to absorb the energy of an attribute. Absorbing the energy of an attribute will increase your resistance to this attribute. Having absorbed a sufficient amount, it is possible to improve some skills. Connor reasoned that at first glance this is an ordinary skill that helps to increase resistance to certain attributes, but with its help it is also possible to strengthen other skills. Lying on the couch, the protagonist said that the problem is that he does not know how far he will be able to advance, improving skills in this way. He looked up and thought that he will have to tie up with hunting in the party. He looked at his stats and thought that he only needed to level up one more skill to learn a new one and he would be able to learn it tomorrow and then he would be done with hunting. He remembered Mary innocently asking him to hunt with them. Connor was embarrassed by this. Falling onto the couch, he cried out that he would think about everything tomorrow. Morning came. Coming out of the room, the protagonist asked if everyone was there. He opened his eyes and was surprised. Looking at the crowd of people, Connor asked if Koma knew what had happened. The guys looked at the protagonist and cried out that he was the Debuff master. The protagonist watched as a crowd of people ran towards him. Stunned, Connor asked if they had all gone crazy. Mary grabbed his hand. She began to run away with him through the crowd of people. Surprised, Connor asked if that was Mary. Turning around, Mary asked him to hold on tight. Mary was holding a blue scroll in her hand. A blue beam appeared on the street. A strong impact was heard from the beam. Standing on the ground, Mary said that she could not get used to this teleportation. Kneeling, the protagonist said that this was the place of their first hunt. Smiling, Mary noted that she did not think that they would end up there. However, it was good that she used the scroll of return. Connor clarified if she wanted to explain what was going on. Mary replied that he had better take a look at it, after which a blue projection appeared in front of the protagonist. Connor saw a discussion about him on the internet. Looking down, Mary said that someone leaked a video of their hunt. Frowning, the protagonist said that the only one missing from the video was Carl. Frowning, Mary replied that he was right and Carl left the party yesterday. Apparently, he published the video right after he went to another part of the continent. Mary asked why he did that. Looking away, Connor stated that there were many players there who would call him brother and then stab him in the back. He imagined hugging Simon. The protagonist remembered Simon pointing a staff at him. Enraged, Connor assumed that he was deeply hurt by the fool's actions. Mary looked at the protagonist's back and asked for forgiveness, noting that if she had not invited him to their party. Connor replied that she was not to blame for anything and that Carl turned out to be a bad person, not her. Turning around, the protagonist thanked her for getting him out of there. Following him, Mary clarified what he was going to do. Connor replied that he wanted to level up one more level and leave there, adding that the rumors would only spread more and he could not stay there for long. A drop of sweat was running down Mary's face. She bit her lower lip. She called out to Connor with a sad look. The protagonist turned around and looked at her. She asked him if she could come with him with a smile on her face. As they walked through the ruins, Mary noted that when they were there yesterday, the place was crawling with monsters, but today there was no sign of anyone. She looked at Connor and assumed that they all died because of the debuff he had inflicted yesterday. He looked dumbfounded and thought that he felt awkward. He wondered if they would be in a party of just the two of them. Looking at Mary, Connor noted that he would feel even more awkward since he had recently been freaking out over the video. Mary turned around and looked at the protagonist. He mentally asked how he could refuse her when she was looking at him with such hope. Koma, looking pleased, stated that the owner was right. He whispered in Connor's ear that he was right about that one. The protagonist brushed him off his shoulder and stated that Koma had been quiet lately, and today he was in a playful mood. Koma cried out that he thought so, that Connor was only bad when it came to women. Crossing his arms, Koma replied that his good mood was due to the fact that he had received his first skill. Pointing his finger, the protagonist noted that he had forgotten that by becoming stronger, he also gained strength. Mary ran up to them and asked if the pet had received a skill, adding that she had heard that skills were only available to high-level pets. Koma ordered them to stop calling him the pet's master. Mary was taken aback by this. Crossing his arms, Koma said that for her information, he was the great spirit of the forest and had a contract with Connor. Squatting in front of him, Mary noted that Koma called the protagonist the master, so she thought he was his pet. Koma clarified whether she understood that this was already the intricacies of business. Connor looked at her silently. Mary had a smile on her face. Standing next to her, the protagonist asked why she was so good to him. He looked at her and asked if it was because he was a useful teammate. Mary said that too, and the first reason was that he was handsome. Connor, taken aback, asked again. Smiling, Mary noted that it was a joke and that she enjoyed teasing him. Koma listened to them with a satisfied look. Sitting down on a stone, Mary said that in fact, initially she really thought that he could be useful for hunting, but now she had another reason. The protagonist asked what her reason was. Mary calmly answered that everything was simple and that she was interested in him, not in the Debuff master, but in the gamer Connor. The protagonist imagined himself standing back to back with himself from reality. Looking down, Connor said that he was not such a great player. Mary noted that he was a good person. Looking at him, Mary emphasized the fact that one hunt was enough for her to understand how good he was. She remembered him standing among the guys and noticed that he not only used debuff skills, but also cared about his teammates. Connor examined the blade. Mary stated that he was pointing out how to best use the equipment, what position to take, noting that she had never met anyone like him. Confused, the protagonist suggested that it was probably because he used to be a guild master. Crossing her legs, Mary said that this is why she was interested in him and was curious about what kind of person he was. Exhaling, Connor replied that he understood what she was talking about, but he was not someone to be interested in. He was standing among the ruins. The ground beneath him suddenly collapsed. Taken aback, the protagonist asked what was happening. Frightened, Mary called out to him. Messages popped up that he was stunned and there were 5 seconds left until he woke up. Connor suddenly opened his eyes. Having risen, the protagonist asked if the ground had just gone out from under him. He turned around at the sound of Mary's voice. She and Koma came up to him. A dumbfounded Connor said that Mary's shoulder was injured. Mary looked at her shoulder and said that everything was fine. Koma, looking pleased, said that when they were falling, Mary had shielded him from the falling stone. Koma jumped onto the protagonist's hand, who apologized to Mary for what had happened. She replied that everything was fine and the wound was small, and that she had recently drunk a potion so she would recover soon. They suddenly looked to the side. They saw the corpses of small lizards. The plot tells us that this is the dungeon of the Sohak ruins, the laboratory of the religious organization Ostrich. A puzzled Mary said that everything there looked very suspicious. She looked at the wires and the dead lizards and suggested that it was somehow connected with the fact that during the hunt, a large number of monsters appeared. She said with a serious expression that there was no information anywhere that there was such a place under the ruins of Sohak. Smiling, Connor asked if it was a secret dungeon. He imagined a goblin and thought that a secret dungeon or cave was a place with special monsters or quests. One of such monsters was the Goblin Lord. Joyfully, Connor noted that a special dungeon meant a special reward. Pointing his finger, the protagonist said that there was someone there. The guy walked out of the lab. He fell to the ground. Connor and Mary looked at each other. They poured the potion into the guy's mouth. Sitting on the wires, the guy thanked them, noting that he survived thanks to them. The protagonist asked what kind of place it was. The guy showed a badge and said that he was a member of a secret society known as the Guardians. He and his comrades were sent to the ruins of Sohak after they were informed of the existence of a dark religious organization Ostrich. The guy imagined how the mysterious guy concentrated mana in his hand. He noted that, however, the people from Ostrich were much stronger than them and he had no choice but to run away. Sitting in front of the guy asked to stop the plot of the dark organization. Connor asked with a serious look what was required of them. The guy frowned and said that in the laboratory there were devices with 5 spheres. It was necessary to destroy these spheres, otherwise the most terrible evil would be born. The warriors ran towards them. Connor grabbed a weapon and said that he would deal with them, and Mary should take care of this man. Holding a club on his shoulder, the main character said that she suffered because of him, so he must be held responsible. Turning around, Connor asked to promise that Mary would not post videos or screenshots of him online. The guys pounced on him. The protagonist also asked to promise that Mary would not blab about what she would see there. He suddenly turned around. Connor launched a series of attacks at the warriors. The protagonist, with glowing eyes, declared that he would destroy everyone and everything in this dungeon. A message appeared about a hidden quest. It was necessary to thwart a conspiracy and destroy the energy spheres in the laboratory of the cult of Osric in order to thwart the organization's plans to commit a conspiracy. Suddenly, the guy flew sharply into the wall. Sitting on the floor, he said that he was a bastard, not a keeper, asked that he was an adventurer, to which he was asked that he did not need to know this, where the laboratory was. Crouching in front of him, the protagonist said that he would spare his life if he answered him, to which the guy replied that he should not make him laugh. They, the cult, were not begging to spare their lives. The boy smiled widely and shouted that he was a stupid heretic. It seemed that he came here to gain access to the research lab. He would soon deeply regret coming here. Leaning on his weapon, the protagonist replied that he acknowledged his loyalty. No matter how much he asked, he would not say anything, to which the boy said that even if he tortured him, his answer would be the same. Grabbing his weapon, Connor asked why he would torture him. It was too cruel, he just wanted to relieve stress. The boy looked at him in bewilderment, hearing that in fact, he had not fought for a long time, and his body was so demanding it. Smiling widely, the protagonist continued that he sincerely hoped that his loyalty would not change. The hero's eyes sparkled and he said that he just wanted to break something. Pointing to the side, the guy said that if he went inside, he would see a fork, let him go straight, then turn right, and he would find a research lab. Hitting him on the head, the main character said that he was a little bastard. Standing in front of him, the protagonist said that now that they knew where it was, they would go, and the girl turned to him. Looking at the hero in surprise, she asked why, to which the hero asked again that he was hiding his power. Looking at her, Connor said that he would tell her everything after this task was completed, let her wait until then. Sighing, Mary answered that it was okay. Walking along the corridor, she asked that he promised that he would tell her, okay, to which the hero answered approvingly. The guy thoughtfully looked to the side. A broken flask appeared. Dead people were lying on the floor. The dungeon of the ruins of Sohoki, the research laboratories of the cult of Osric. Looking at the papers, the man said that he could not use it. Turning around, Romulus said that they interfere with their research until the very end. Do they? The Guardians have nothing better to do. The guy furiously shouted that their goal is to protect the world. They, the Guardians, will not tolerate their insidious plans. Looking straight ahead with fear, he added that they will. Suddenly, the man struck him. Leaving, Romulus said that he should clean up here, to which they complied. Looking at the guy, Romulus asked what happened to the Guardian who escaped, to which he was told that he was being pursued. He was seriously injured, so he probably could not go far. Raising his head, the priest thought about the pathetic Guardians. They were furious and tried to stop them, but in the end they failed. Looking at the huge egg, he added that he should watch from the afterlife as their ruler was resurrected. Suddenly, a bright glow appeared. A devastating explosion thundered. The priest raised his head in surprise and asked what. Frightened, opening his eyes, he shouted that no. Suddenly, the priest turned around, hearing the question of what happened. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist said that it was an excellent shot. Looking at them, the priest asked who they were. They were guardians, to which the hero asked again why everyone he met kept asking if he was a guardian. Looking straight ahead, the priest heard that he was a saboteur, and he was a bastard, to which he wondered if they had really destroyed everyone outside. The guys looked at Romulus, hearing that they should increase productivity. Now that the uninvited guests had broken inside, they needed to immediately begin the resurrection ritual. The man pulled the lever. Suddenly, electricity began to flow through the wires. Lightning appeared around. It was written that the resurrection ritual was beginning. He must destroy all 5 spheres within 5 minutes to prevent the boss monster from resurrecting. The destroyed spheres were one of 5. The remaining time was 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Time began to pass. Looking straight ahead, the girl said that no, this was a quest with a time limit, to which the protagonist replied that he should focus on destroying the remaining spheres. He would deal with the rest himself. The hero grinned, hearing that, but he was sure that he could handle it alone, to which he replied that in any case, there were not many left. The priest held a weapon in his hands, and the protagonist thought that this Romulus might be a little annoying, but rushing forward, the protagonist said that fine, let him take care of the spheres then. Stretching his hand forward, the priest shouted, then let this impudent heretic be punished. They swung a sword at the protagonist. The protagonist deftly repelled the enemy's attacks. The hero dodged the attack. Striking with his elbow, the hero said, damn it. The man's eyes widened in surprise. Swinging his weapon, the protagonist shouted that he should get out of his way. Suddenly, the guy behind him shouted. The protagonist held back his attack. A green projectile was flying at the hero. Suddenly, there was an explosion. The masked guy wheezed loudly. Holding him by the neck, the protagonist asked that he was using an area attack when his subordinates were here. Wasn't that too much? Raising his hand, Romulus asked what the one who used a man as a shield was telling him. Standing in front of the hero, the priest said that he admitted that he was strong. He had a high level of combat sense and situational awareness. It would be difficult to deal with him alone. Frowning, the protagonist asked, "So, there are no more fighters left except you, so he is going to surrender." Romulus grinned slightly. The hero opened his eyes in surprise, hearing that, and why did he assume that he was alone? Suddenly, the protagonist waved his hand. Looking to the side, Connor wondered what it was. Looking at the spirit, he continued that the soul, no, it was a ghost. Standing aside from the hero, the priest said that he was Romulus, the high priest of the great cult of Osric. He was a dark priest. Spirits emanated from the corpses, and he said that the souls of the dead were his strength. A spirit came out of the guy, and he added that while there were corpses near him, he would not be able to defeat him. Raising his hand, Romulus turned to the hero. Looking straight ahead, he said that he would also die and become his strength. It was written that he was the high priest of the cult of Osric, level 55, human race, dark priest class, special skill shadow of the dead. Skeleton heads flew above the protagonist. Connor ran as fast as he could. The spirits were reaching for the guy's body. After a moment, he stopped with his foot. He cut the air above his head. The spirit swam away in fear. He closed his eyes in the whirlwind. The spirits were passing through the protagonist's body. His strength points were decreasing every time they passed through his body. This was a summoned debuff. Physical attacks were useless. If he dragged it out, he would never win. He had to end this quickly. The remaining time was 3 minutes. Could it be that this bastard's goal? He continued the thought that to drag out time, the hero looked at Romulus. He laughed and said that he was a fool. He could not defeat his ghosts with such attacks. The voice asked again that yes, there was an explosion. He continued that then he would just have to hit him. The hero swung and made a powerful blow that deals the enemy the strongest blow. He ran into the guy with a scream. Then he said with a smile that he had blocked it, then maybe he would block it with his face. Romulus screamed furiously that he was a heretic bastard. He continued that he would kill him. The aura of spirits swirled around the hero. Romulus controlled the bright vortices. Romulus shouted to spin as much as he wanted. The guy continued that he would not be able to defeat him or prevent his resurrection. Level 45 had been reached. He could now use a new skill, the flying arrow. The flying arrow throws a weapon at the target enemy. A bright flash flashed in space. Romulus extended his hand forward. He said in surprise what it was. The hero replied with a smile that it was divine punishment, bastard. His eyes burned with rage. The flying arrow hit the guy. Blood spurted from Romulus's mouth. A bright flash illuminated everything around. The guy was sitting on the ground with his head down. The arrow was sticking out of the guy's chest. The hero said that controlling it was not as difficult as he thought, and if he had known it was that easy, he would have used it earlier. He continued that now all that was left was this. The hero raised his head and said that he had broken the spheres, right? The arrow had flown around the guy. There was an explosion. It flashed through his mind that it was good. The man had aimed his blow upwards. He continued to think that there were only 2 spheres left. Mary frowned and thought that she just needed to hold on a little longer. The man behind him shouted, couldn't she just stop? He continued furiously, so that she wouldn't interfere with their ritual. The girl opened her mouth in fear. He grabbed her sore shoulder. She shouted. Mary thought angrily that there was very little time left. The remaining time was 1 minute and 20 seconds. The arrow flew forward rapidly. A bright energy flared in front of them. The guy shouted that no, the spheres. A moment later, the protagonist knocked him off his feet. Mark called the hero. He exhaled and replied that she looked like she was in a lot of pain, and that it was difficult to aim because of her shoulder injury. The girl lowered her eyes and said that she was only getting in his way, and apologized. The boy replied that there was no need to apologize. After all, she had to destroy the remaining sphere. The girl asked again. The hero held a weapon in his hands and said that the skill was currently being restored. A flying arrow would throw the weapon at the target enemy, reloading for 3 minutes. The voice said that the sphere could not be destroyed with normal attacks, so all they could rely on was her magic. The girl pursed her lips in fear. Connor replied that if it were him, he would at least try, no matter whether he succeeded or not. Time would pass. What should they do? Mary said that she understood and that she would try. She swung and asked not to blame her too much if she missed. The time remaining was 15 seconds. Fire was igniting on her weapon. The scoreboard said 13 seconds. The girl trembled and asked, 10 seconds left. The hero held her hands, 6 seconds left. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. 5 seconds left. The hero turned his gaze to the girl. Mary looked into his eyes. 4 seconds left. The girl smiled. They screamed furiously and pointed their weapons in front of them. 3 seconds left. 2. A bright flash was near the sphere. 1 second left. Romulus screamed in fear that no. The flash flew to the sphere and exploded. The voice said that he was Romulus. People looked at it in surprise. The guy screamed that he would bring to this world. He opened his mouth wide and continued that a disaster. The time limit was exceeded. He failed to prevent the revival of the boss monster, the destruction of the sphere 4/5. The board said to get ready, the boss monster will awaken soon. The sphere began to crack. Bright flashes were burning from it. Connor closed his eyes and said that this bastard, like a zombie, had to be finished off. Mary shockingly told the hero what it was. He looked up in fear. A huge snake monster appeared from the sphere. Elimination of the disaster. Category: Hidden Quest. Objective: Defeat the reanimated disaster. Lightning Python. Progress: 0%. Need to defeat the boss monster. Lightning flew around the monster. Grinning, the protagonist thought that those crazy bastards, when they talked about resurrecting the disaster, they meant the python. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist thought that, but it was smaller than he expected. Looking at the monster, the protagonist thought that in ancient legends it was described as a giant snake that could wrap itself around a large mountain, but this snake is only about 20 meters long. The monster opened its mouth. It was written that the lightning python, a monster resurrected as a result of the cult's evil experiments, a creature from another world, in just one night turned Sohoku, a once prosperous city, into ruins. Level 70, species unknown, boss rank, lightning destroyer class, special ability charge strike, to which the hero thought that, moreover, it is only level 70. The girl, looking straight ahead, said that it seems that they were unable to fully resurrect him due to the destroyed spheres, but he is still level 70. They must flee. The protagonist smirked, hearing that they will not fight him, right? To which Connor replied that he would be sorry. He cannot resist such a rare dish. He will take care of it, so let her run first. Looking at the girl, the hero was surprised. Handing him the flask, she said that it was a potion to protect against elemental attacks. It was a low-level potion, so it might not help much, but it was better than nothing, right? Looking at the potion, the protagonist asked again, and she said that since they had come this far, they could not miss such a rare experience. Smirking, Mary said that she would protect him. Looking at her, the protagonist heard that they would fight together until the end, to which he replied that it was good. The monster's eyes appeared. Someone said that, but if they died here. Looking at the monster, the hero added that he would not take responsibility. The hero quickly ran away from the explosion. Connor leaned down slightly. Holding the potion in his hands, the hero said that given his size, he moved quickly. They could not afford to relax. It was written that the resistance to elemental attacks was increased to 50. Suddenly the python rushed forward. The monster crashed into the wall, and the hero said, "Well then." Suddenly Connor swung his weapon at the monster. Smiling, the protagonist added that they would see how he would cope with a strong blow. Rushing towards the monster, he used mortality, which reduces the defense of enemies and magic resistance. The mace emitted a glow. It was written about a powerful blow, which inflicts a strong blow on the enemy. The protagonist used a triple blow on the monster. Lightning emitted from the python's body. The hero jumped back sharply and exclaimed. Suddenly he turned around. Looking at the monster, it was heard that the python was using charged breath. Suddenly the girl attacked him from the side. A fiery blow flew at the monster. The protagonist deftly dodged the beam. The monster gave an attack upward. The hero fell to the ground, and the girl asked if he was okay. Holding his head, Connor said that yes, he barely dodged, to which Mary said that now it sounded like a real cry of pain, to which the hero continued that he should pretend that she did not hear it. Covering one eye, the protagonist thought that it really was. Standing among the rifts, the protagonist added that no matter how weak he was, a hidden boss is still a hidden boss, right? And his area attack is at the level of a catastrophe. Looking away, the protagonist heard that if he attacked again like that, the entire lab could collapse, an offer to end it quickly before it gained even more strength, to which the hero replied that he agreed, but lightning flew around the python, and the hero said that it did not look like it would wait for them. It was written that the python protected its body with a charged barrier. Magic resistance increased by 200. The monster stuck out its tongue. It was written that approaching the charged barrier would result in electric shock and paralysis. The python released an attack, and the protagonist thought that he was pouring mana into the charged breath while strengthening the barrier until then. A barrier appeared around the python, and he added that until it gained strength again. Looking away, the protagonist thought about how annoyingly merciless this pattern was, and Mary asked what they should do. With this status, magic would not work, and approaching with melee attacks would most likely cause paralysis. Raising his hand, the protagonist said that not all was lost, to which she asked that it was. Stretching his hand forward, Connor said that this was the moment when they should use debuffs. It was written about exhaustion. The health and mana of the enemies gradually decreased. A green glow appeared around the python. The monster looked forward in surprise. Suddenly he raised his head up. The python went into a frenzy due to severe pain. The barrier was removed. Looking at him, the girl said that the barrier was destroyed, and the hero asked that no matter how high his magic resistance was, he would still receive the same fixed damage, right? Grinning, the hero thought that due to the forced removal of the barrier, he probably could not properly collect mana. The python's stats appeared, and he added that he, too, had lost a significant amount of health. Rushing forward, the protagonist thought that this should be enough. The protagonist ran past the python. Suddenly, the monster released a sphere of lightning. The protagonist looked to the side. Suddenly, he sharply reflected the python's attack. Frowning, Connor turned his head. Stretching his hand to the side, the hero used speed control, which reduces the speed of movement, attack, and spell casting. Swinging, the hero asked what he thought. He will fall for the same bait again. He is a stubborn python. Suddenly, a purple stripe appeared on his eye. The scales appeared. The hero's eyes glowed blue. It was written about contempt for the strong, increased damage to enemies with higher levels, decreased damage taken. A blue beam appeared behind the hero. Suddenly, the protagonist grinned. It was written to disrupt the cult's plot. The quest is complete. The defeated python was lying on the ground. Notification to disrupt the cult's plot. The quest is complete. You need to collect the rewards from the python's corpse. The level has increased. The 46th level has been reached. The guy's thoughts flashed that he thought he would be able to get at least 2 levels, but he only got 1, and how long will it take to reach level 200? The hero thought that, well, this is disappointing, but the reward is worthy. Mary ran up to him and called him. She said that she can't believe it. He really killed him. The guy replied that it was all thanks to her. She worked hard. The girl frowned and thought that it was a lie, and that she was sure that he would have done it himself without her help. Looking at the dead monster, she continued to think that even taking into account the debuffs, it would take 5 high-level players above level 70 to defeat this boss monster. The hero crouched in front of the snake. The girl thought that he was level 45 and he could do it alone. The guy called her. The girl apologized. She said that she thought for a moment maybe they would quickly check the rewards. Connor answered no before that. The hero turned his gaze to her and said that there was one more important question. Mary said fearfully that, as she suspected, he was hiding something. Connor asked if she had rubber gloves by any chance. The girl smiled. The guy said that no matter how he looked at it, it looked like they would have to cut up a python to get the reward. Mary said that it was a really important question. Notice, he got python scales, he got python blood, he got python meat and python bones. He got a python fang. The girl looked at the loot and said that even after they only picked the best items, there were still a lot of them. The big bosses were definitely worth the trouble. Connor crouched down and said that the only problem was that they were too big. Mary said that she guessed she was unhappy with the rewards. It flashed through the guy's mind that he had even analyzed it, but the reward was just stuff and it was a hidden dungeon boss. That was the only useful thing anyway. The Python core, the energy cloth that the Python held, contains a large amount of light attribute energy, type, consumable. The guy continued the thought that the Python core, if he learned this, he would not have to work so hard anymore. Connor thought that, but there was only one of him, so he could not share it. The girl looked at him questioningly. Connor walked up to Mary and said that he was a little embarrassed to say, but Mary had contributed, but to be honest, he thought he had contributed more. The guy walked past and continued that, but he had a conscience, and he could not take all these rewards for himself. He picked up the sphere. Then he said that he would take this insignificant Python core and let him take the rest. They looked into each other's eyes. After a moment, the girl laughed. The guy turned away bashfully. He asked why she suddenly started laughing. It was so creepy. Mary replied that the more she watched, the more interesting he became. She continued that he didn't have to be so attentive. He should get all the rewards. The hero asked in surprise and said that, but smirking. The girl asked that she remembered how they used to go hunting. She collected crystals and gave them to him, said that he could think of it as the same thing, not to worry about it. The hero flew past the beams, and she continued that she thought she was rewarded enough just by doing this task together. It was the most interesting quest she had ever participated in. Looking straight ahead, Mary said that she probably would never forget it. Looking at her, the hero thought about what was so interesting, and then said that if she insisted, he could not do anything about it. Raising his eyebrows, he thought that he did not expect this to happen. It is not that he does not want it, but the protagonist folded his arms and thought that he wouldn't be able to fit it all into his inventory. Looking away, the protagonist heard her thinking it would be better to split it in half, and Koma raised his hand and asked that it was finally time for this body to come out. Looking at the hamster, the protagonist asked what happened, trying to steal the remains, to which he replied that he was an ignorant owner, asked that he still didn't understand why he was so amazing. Koma raised his hands up and shouted. Suddenly, he opened a portal. Lowering his hands, he exclaimed loudly. The protagonist opened his eyes in surprise, hearing him look, to which he replied that he was looking. Stretching his hand out to the side, Koma said that this was his new magic. Holding the bag behind his back, he added that it was called an endless bag. Suddenly, he looked down in fear. Holding it in his hands, the protagonist asked that this is the new skill, the old rag, to which he replied that he should let it go. He is an idiot. Looking at the dimension, the hero asked in surprise what it was. Koma was holding onto the cloth. It was written that he should take this, an endless bag. This is a magic bag created with Koma's skill. It is an artifact of the spiritual world that embodies the emptiness of the world of nothingness. Since it is an item that personifies emptiness, the storage capacity is infinite, and Koma can wrap this bag of emptiness around his back and store items in it. The hero asked in surprise that it has an infinite capacity. One of the problems that ordinary users often face is the capacity of the inventory. With this skill, you can solve all the problems at once. Holding the hamster in his hands, the hero said that he is a little rascal. He finally works off his maintenance. Sighing, Koma said that when it comes to hitting the jackpot, he is always ready, to which the hero asked that he wants something to eat to treat him today. The man took a step forward. Standing behind the hero, he asked that he really defeated him. The protagonist and Mary looked at each other in fear. Looking at the man, the protagonist asked who he was and then thought that he did not feel his presence at all. Grinning, the man said that he should not get him wrong, he is not his enemy. With wide eyes, the protagonist said that he was. The guy grinned, looking at him. The guy looked away. He grinned, hearing that he was the wounded guard. Putting his hand to his face, the guy asked that he was still in this form, said that he tried to appear spectacularly, but now he feels a little awkward. Looking straight ahead, he said that in any case, he was glad to see him. With wide eyes, the protagonist heard that he was not. The guy looked straight at him and asked Connor right. Suddenly there was a flash. Pointing his gun at the guy, the hero asked who he was, to which he replied that he would have understood if he had used the rune of insight, and then introduced himself. Crouching down, the protagonist asked who he was, how he knew his name, to which he clarified that he was one of those who act before thinking. The guy raised his hand, and the hero said that even with the rune of insight he had no way to check his data, asked that he also knew this, right? The protagonist jumped back and wheezed. Crouching down, Connor thought that he had forgotten about it for a moment. The guy raised his hand, and the hero added that if the difference in levels was too big, they could hide their information. The guy was surprised to hear that, so why did such a strong guy like him approach him disguised? Standing in front of him, the protagonist asked that his goal couldn't just be to show off his power to a mere level 46 user, right? To which the guy said that he apologized for that, he was the type to act before he thought. Looking straight ahead, the hero heard that there was really no particular reason for that, he was just interested in him, to which the hero asked that he was interested in a small player like him. The guy smirked and said that to be honest, he might be a small player, but he wasn't an ordinary user, was he? Looking up, the protagonist heard that it was true, Vincent's only student. Chuck opened his mouth and said that he was an ordinary user, well, he'll get straight to the point. Vincent's only student. Connor opened his eyes and asked how he was. The guy closed his eyes and said not to worry, he was the only one who knew about Vincent. Then he passed by and added that if he wanted to know more, he should come to Since the Dawn, he would contact him separately soon. Then he turned around abruptly. Then he looked at the girl and said that he had ruined the cheerful atmosphere. Mary stared at him silently. Chuck smirked. Then he raised his hand and said goodbye, and Connor opened his eyes. Then he gave up his fist and thought that his identity had been revealed, and it was done by someone incredibly powerful. Then he opened his mouth and added that the other rankers also knew. He said that he was the only one who knew about Master Vincent. Could he believe these words? Could Genesis also know who he was? The protagonist introduced the blonde and thought that he had just begun, but everything ends like this. Mary touched the protagonist. Then she squeezed him and noted that she knew nothing. Then she looked at him and added that even if she heard something, he would not be interested, and she did not make any videos or screenshots. Then she smiled and noted that she should not worry, he had nothing to worry about. Koma smiled and said that if anything happened, he would protect him, so he should not be afraid. Connor stared in surprise. Then he covered his mouth. Then he looked at the ceiling and noted that he was grateful to both of them. The protagonist remembered the passage to the cave and said that after leaving the hidden dungeon, the path with Mary came to an end. Then he remembered how the girl waved to him and added that she said that she would stay in the ruins for a while to focus on leveling up. Connor stared at the camera and noted that he had not entered the DNM since then. Then he leaned on his hand and added that despite the fact that Mary and Koma reassured him, was it because of concern that his information could be so easily revealed? After which he opened his mouth and noted that he didn't know, he would just sleep a little. The phone rang and Connor said that 3 days had passed since he had entered the DNM, after which a notification came and the protagonist added that he had received an email from this guy. The moon was shining on Sinskadong in the Gangnam area. Connor stared at the phone and noted that this guy was crazy, why arrange a meeting at a club? After which he looked at the people and added that by the way, it had been a long time since he wandered the streets at night like this, he always just played games, while others went out to have fun. Then he stopped. The protagonist turned to the building and asked what the Heavens Club was it? After which he raised his head and said that it was his first time at the club, they wouldn't throw him out. The guard put his hand out and noted that he had violated the dress code. Connor stuck out his finger, thought that at least he was rejected for a dress code violation and not for his appearance, and said that he wasn't there to have fun, he just wanted to meet someone. Could he just go in and out quickly? The guard gritted his teeth and heard that maybe that wouldn't work. The guy looked at the protagonist and asked who wears sweatpants to the Heaven Club, and the girl asked him to stop because he might hear it. Then he showed the middle finger and noted that if he could hear it, he would show it to him, tell him to stop causing trouble and get lost. Connor gritted his teeth in anger. Chuck hugged the protagonist and asked him that he was already here. Then he turned and added that he should dress better. The guard bowed and yelled that he didn't know the protagonist was Chuck's friend, and Chuck said that it was okay, it was his first time at the club. But that was a bit rude. If he were a guard, even he would want to kick his ass, and the protagonist remarked that it sounded like he was telling him to listen to him. The girl looked at the protagonist and remarked that he was so cool, and the guy remarked that it couldn't be, this loser knew Chuck. Chuck looked back. Then his face darkened and remarked that they screwed up, they couldn't come to Since Dawn anymore. The equipment was in the club. People were dancing inside. The guards were standing by the VIP room. Chuck reached for the drinks and asked what he would like, Dom Perignon or Armanda. Then he smiled and added that if he didn't want champagne, he could offer him something else, and Connor replied that he didn't even know what it was and that he didn't come here to drink. Chuck turned around in surprise and said that if he wanted to dance, he shouldn't be shy, he should come out and dance, and the protagonist yelled that he was deliberately trying to provoke him. He invited him himself. Chuck started pouring alcohol and said that his reaction was funny, so he decided to tease him, and Connor said not to irritate him, just tell him who he really was. Then he stared at the guy and heard that he had a lot to apologize for, including ruining his last date, so he should let him tell him a few things. Chuck remembered looking at the body and said that he remembered the person he was disguised as. Then he opened his mouth and added that in fact, this man was a real member of the group who escaped from Ostrich's research lab and died shortly after. He was also a member of the Guardians like him. Connor looked at him and asked what he wanted to say, that he disguised himself as a dead comrade to deceive him, and Chuck replied that he had no excuse for that, using a dead comrade was a betrayal of the Guardians. Then he took the glass, heard that it was worth it for him, he apologized to them, but he did not regret anything, and said what he meant by saying it was worth it, that he was Vincent's student, no, Vincent's only student. Then he took a sip, heard that it was true, but his main goal was to test the power of hidden classes like him, and noted that he already knew that he was from a hidden class. Connor poured the drink back into the glass and shouted what he said, and Chuck said that he also belonged to the hidden class, like him. Then he opened his mouth, thought, he knew that he was not an ordinary guy. But still it was amazing, another hidden class, and said that he knew about it because he was also from the hidden class. Chuck smiled and noted that he knew about it because of this, hidden classes are not omnipotent, and Connor noted that it was strangely annoying. Chuck folded his arms and said that he did not need to worry about his information. As he said before, even in reality he can say that he is a little special. No one except him knows about it, not even those guys from Genesis, whom he is so afraid of, know anything about him being Vincent's student. Connor gritted his teeth and asked who is afraid of those guys. Then he put his hands to the sides and added what his hidden class was. Isn't it a lie that only he knows everything about him? And Chuck replied that he can't tell him that. He's still too weak to tell him everything. The guy reached for the glass and told the protagonist to get stronger. Then he turned around and noted that until then, he wouldn't be able to tell him everything with a clear conscience. He had to live up to the title of Vincent's student. Connor stared at him calmly. Chuck took a sip and asked that when they finished talking, he was going to go dancing, and Connor shouted that he didn't want to. Coma smiled and greeted the owner. Connor walked through the market and asked that he hadn't caused any trouble while he was gone, and Coma replied that he wasn't as much of a troublemaker as his owner. Then he lay down on the scarf and asked if he was okay and had handled things in the other world, and Connor replied that he wasn't sure. Then he stared at Chuck and thought that after all, the conversation with the guy just ended without much discussion. What with this guy, what are his intentions? It doesn't seem like his fur is just to establish connections with other hidden classes. Coma squeezed the nut and asked why he came here. Then he stared straight and noted that this dark and seedy place is not suitable for someone like him. Then he stared at the protagonist and asked if he felt irritated, and Connor asked what he was talking about. This is not the place for such a thing. The protagonist thought about the riches and thought that this place is famous for its abundance of adult content, such as bars, gambling houses, and other adult entertainment venues. It is famous for allowing players to experience all kinds of pleasures in virtual reality. Of course, he came here only for the underground market. Then he looked around the street and noticed that he does not plan to stay here for long. After selling the items, he goes to the underground market, and after updating his equipment, he goes to another region. Then he opened his eyes. The protagonist looked at the guy and noticed the clothes. The guy walked up to another person and Connor asked if they were from Genesis. The protagonist closed his eyes and thought that these bastards from a prestigious guild are causing trouble even in a place like this. They still continue their rotten antics. Then he looked angrily and thought that he would love to crush them right now. Then he gritted his teeth and noted that it does not matter. Connor folded his arms, heard what happened, was he scared, and said who he was scared of. He avoids trash because it scares. No, he avoids it because it is dirty. Then he passed by and added that these are the ones they will crush someday. Now is just not the right time. They need to sell everything quickly. The guy leaned over and asked if he heard rumors. They say that he has something good. The man stood silently and heard that he wants to check it out, but he does not even want to listen to him. Let him answer him. Is he deaf? The other guy put his hand on his shoulder and noted that even after several tries, something seems suspicious. The insight rune does not work properly. Does not seem to him that he is suspiciously strong. Then the guy turned and noted that this is why Mr. Kalji always beats him up. If this old man is higher level, and what? Then he smirked and added that they were from Genesis. If he got involved with them, it would be a war with Genesis. Then he looked at the crowd and added that they wouldn't do anything. No one would stop them. No one could stand in their way. He understood. The guy touched his chest. Then he smiled and asked if he was too scared to talk. Connor punched the guy in the face, after which he flew into the wall. The guy opened his mouth and the protagonist noted that he was annoying him with his talk. Connor opened his mouth and shouted who was scared now. The guy opened his mouth and shouted that doesn't he see this uniform? They are from Genesis. The protagonist punched him and shouted that this is why he hates them even more. Then he put his hands on his hips and said that these guys are nothing without their guild, and yet they are making a fuss, and Koma said that it looks like the owner couldn't hold back after all. Then he gritted his teeth and remarked that if only someone hadn't been chatting next to him, he would have endured it, and Koma remarked that he had just expressed a few thoughts. Connor turned around and said not to worry too much. These guys were like that by nature. The man stood silently, and the protagonist wondered if he really couldn't talk. The protagonist turned around, heard that their guild wasn't that big. How was he going to deal with the consequences? And Connor remarked that in any case, this wasn't the kind of PvP that would be recorded. They probably wouldn't even dare to talk after being beaten. Then he gritted his teeth and added that they would just leave after selling their goods. The man lifted his hat. The intervention hotel was lit by lanterns. The protagonist opened the door and saw a notice. Connor stood on the platform and Koma remarked that it was so spacious here. Then Koma opened his mouth and added that it looked so small from the outside. It was a service created to serve and train adventurers. Although it was a bit expensive, it was worth it. The protagonist smiled and said that it was good, and Koma shouted that he knew without his words. Then he summoned a golden ball. Then he closed his eyes and summoned an endless bag. The protagonist looked at the items and asked if it was necessary to make so much noise when taking something out, and Toma replied that you should not underestimate the moment when this body shines. Then he picked up the mace, heard that the owner's main weapon should have been a one-handed blunt object. Why did he buy the other weapon too? And replied because it was the cheapest and easiest to use, but not his main weapon. Then he stared at the notification and noted that now it was time to choose the main weapon. After which he presented the emblems and thought that the Debuff Master has access to 5 types of weapons, including blunt weapons. He would prefer to use the blunt weapons he used before, but he should try other options. The protagonist looked to the side and summoned a shadow boxer, after which a punching bag appeared in front of him. Connor put on a shield and asked if he should start with the shield for now, after which he hit the punching bag. Then he abruptly struck the next blow. Connor struck the last blow, after which he opened his mouth and said that the destructive power is not so bad, but the DPS is too low. Then he stared at the notification. The protagonist grabbed the sword and said that in this case, he will try a two-handed sword, after which he swung. Koma opened his mouth and asked how long he was going to continue this. 2 hours had already passed. The tired protagonist stood in the middle of the site. Then he opened his mouth and thought that everything was so ambiguous. Then he stared at the weapon and added that each weapon had its pros and cons, but he didn't think any stood out. He thought he'd settled on a familiar and reliable one-handed blunt weapon. The man appeared behind him and remarked that this was all pointless. Connor turned his gaze and asked if he was the old man they'd seen before. The man stared at the protagonist. Chuck scratched the back of his head and the protagonist wondered, more importantly, how did he get here? If this was a closed space, maybe it was Chuck. It was him again. Connor turned around and asked who he was. Was he one of the guards, or was he sent by that annoying guy? The man opened his mouth and asked why he'd helped him, and he wasn't asking for any reward, and the protagonist asked what he was talking about. Then he opened his mouth and yelled for him to just answer. Connor froze silently. Then he opened his mouth and said that it wasn't because he felt sorry for him. After which he remembered sitting on his knee and added that the sight of the old man unable to resist people stronger than him reminded him of his past. The protagonist opened his mouth and noted that he simply did not want to run away from his past anymore. The man adjusted his hat and said that a short but valid reason. Then took off his hat and noted that from now on, it would make him stronger. The protagonist introduced Ben and said that he was a member of the 5 Heavenly Stars, like Beetlejuice, a martial artist who had achieved a high level of skill. Then he imagined him surrounded by weapons and added that with the ability to freely wield 18 types of weapons, he was a person bearing the title of Weapons Master. The protagonist looked at the hat and thought that this cunning old man was Ben. It must have been his hat that prevented the insight from working. Then he gritted his teeth and added that nevertheless, it was surprising to see the interest of Beetlejuice and now Ben, but he must refuse. The protagonist raised his hand and said that he appreciated the offer, But he already, and Ben interrupted, noting that he knew he must already have a master. It was unlikely that such a talent as he did not have a master. Ben raised his hand and noted that the path of training was not limited to the relationship between master and student. It seemed that he had difficulties with his main weapon, and he could help him solve this problem. Then he closed his eyes and added that he was not asking him to become his student, just to treat him as an older passing by, wanting to help a younger one. Connor sweated and thought that this guy's ability to persuade was no joke, but in some way he was right if he had consulted with his master about the weapon. Then he introduced Vincent, who said that this body itself was the ultimate weapon. Why use something else, such things for such worthless people like him? Connor looked at the man and said, to solve the problem with his main weapon, would he tell him what weapon suits him best? And Ben noted that the weapon that suits him. Then he reached into his pocket and asked if he really thought a man like him would be satisfied with only one weapon. Connor's eyes widened. Ben showed his belt and said that from now on, he would be able to train any weapon he could use to the level of his main weapon, after which a notification appeared. The protagonist presented the emblems of rarity and said that in the NWF, all equipment is divided into 8 classes. The existence of the highest class, World, has not yet been confirmed. Then he presented the rarest one and added that thus, among adventurers, the highest practically attainable class, Mythical. Connor opened his mouth and asked that he was giving him a mythical class item, not just lending it to him, and Ben replied that he did not need to worry about it. Once he equipped it, it became a permanent bound item. Connor lowered himself and said that as he had mentioned earlier, since he already had a master, he could not accept a new one. Then he dropped to the floor and added that he would respectfully bow to his esteemed senior, and Ben said that although he had received bows from students, this was the first time he had received one from a junior. Connor's gaze was tense. Then he extended his hand and thanked him. Then he extended it again and shouted that he accepted the offer. Ben smiled and remarked that it reminded him of the time when he was raising a puppy. Connor opened his mouth and shouted if he was kidding, and Ben replied that he was trying to get the result without going through the whole process. There was a big difference between using an item and relying on it. The protagonist stood up and said that he meant he just wouldn't give it up, what he wanted him to do, and the old man asked him to follow him. The warriors fought each other. The host opened his mouth and shouted that the winner was determined. The warrior raised his hands and the host shouted that the winner was Miles, the deadly mace. Connor came to the underground fight club and asked if he should participate in it. Ben opened his mouth and said that despite the fact that Dondajiri has restrictions on the level of participation, it is still quite large. As a result, it creates a good environment for getting to know different fighters, and Connor asked that he should fight the fighters. The old man handed over a paper and noted that this is exactly how to improve the understanding of the weapon. It is more effective to train against people, and not against monsters. Connor stared at the screen and thought, sure, hands-on training is effective for acquiring skills. But what's the point? The strongest person in this arena is an NPC whose level is just above him. Then he saw the champion at level 65. Then he caught the bottle, heard that it was a gift, and asked what it was. The bottle opened. The protagonist saw how the object wrapped around his chest and shouted what it was. Then he touched the core and asked if it was armor, although it looked a little fragile for armor, and Ben replied that as the old saying goes, the more fragile, the better the armor. Then he turned and added that her turn would come soon, so she should hurry up. Yes, and do not use any skills or techniques, let her fight only with her basic skills. Connor opened his mouth and remarked that good. In return, if he defeats the champion, he will receive a Mejingjerd, and Ben remarked that he is quite confident in himself. The protagonist smiled and thought that he was underestimating him too much. He probably thought that he would have problems if he handed him an unfamiliar weapon and limited his skills. Then he remembered standing in the fire and added that thanks to the experience of using various weapons in battles with Genesis and training from his master, which made his level-dependent stats excellent, this place was not an arena for him, but a playground. Then he remembered falling into the water. The protagonist ran into the arena and thought that he would quickly finish this test and take the Mejingjerd. The host stood in the ring. Then he opened his mouth and shouted that the moment they had been waiting for so long had come. A new warrior had appeared who would write a new history in this sacred arena. Then he put out his hand and added that this was a new warrior, Weakling. A lantern lit up above the protagonist. Connor opened his mouth and thought that this was awkward. Besides the terrible name, it was very outdated. It was definitely Ben's doing. The old man smiled in the audience. The protagonist raised an eyebrow when he heard to just look at him. One would think that he was weak, as his name suggests. The mantis looked at the protagonist and noted that he should finish him off with one blow. Then he stuck out his tongue and asked if he should slowly torture him. The protagonist smiled and asked who he thought he was talking to. Pathetic mantis. The mantis suddenly ran and shouted that he was making him regret coming here. The protagonist blocked the blow and noted that he had been wondering about something for a long time. The mantis turned his head and heard that when he smashed his insect-like mimic head, the blood would be red or another color. Then the protagonist swung his sword. Connor gritted his teeth. The mantis looked nervously, after which the protagonist was struck by lightning. Connor fell to the floor and the host shouted that the weakling, who was debuting in his first match, fell victim to Maki's attack. The protagonist opened his mouth and wondered what was happening. It felt like his whole body was pierced by excruciating pain. It couldn't be because of the mantis' attack. Then he stared at the armor core and read the information in the notification. The mantis stuck out its tongue and said that it didn't understand what was happening, but it looked pathetic. Now it was his turn to ask. Connor gritted his teeth. Maki swung and asked what color the blood would be if he cut off his head. Then he strained his gaze and added that he already knew the answer. Maki swung. The protagonist gritted his teeth. Then he jumped back sharply. The mantis stared at him and said that he was lucky that he dodged, but would he be able to dodge the next blow? The protagonist leaned on his sword and remarked that as if things weren't chaotic enough, he should just shut up. Then he swung his sword. The mantis blocked the blow. Then he looked down and said that with such weak blows, what was he trying to achieve? Then he hit the protagonist. Connor gritted his teeth and thought that not only did it hurt, but his body felt sluggish. Usually he could dodge such an attack. Then he stared at the mantis and noted in his head that there must be a reason why Ben did this to him. This wasn't just a fight with a limitation. Then he opened his mouth. The protagonist leaned on his leg. Then he gritted his teeth and said that they would get back to the main thing. Ben stared at the ring and said that it seemed like the master's condition was not very good today. Koma opened his mouth and remarked that he could usually easily dodge such attacks even with his eyes closed, and the old man asked if he was worried about his comrade. Koma turned around and noted that no, quite the opposite, he wanted to see the master, who always behaved harshly, get beaten up at least once, and Ben noted that it seemed like he had a lot locked up inside. The old man looked down and thought that it might be unpleasant now, but there was nothing better for improving his understanding of weapons. Then he stared at the protagonist's sword and added that in a situation where physical superiority and skills were unavailable, the main thing was to find the essence of the weapon. Then he smirked and added that now how would he overcome the situation when he found himself in a weak position if he had always been in a strong position. Ben opened his eyes. Then he saw how the protagonist cut off Maki's hand. The mantis trembled. Then he grabbed the stump and screamed. Connor lowered his head and said that it was more difficult than he thought. It was because of the unusual movements. Then he raised his finger and noted that next time it would be his right hand. Maki opened his mouth and screamed that he was an arrogant bastard. After which he began to beat the protagonist and the host shouted that what an unexpected turn of events. The weakling who could not come to his senses cut off Maki's hand with one blow. The mantis, having lost its mind, begins to attack randomly. Ben leaned on his heads and thought that it was surprising whether he understood the essence of a two-handed sword in such a short time. Then he stared at the fight and added that, as a rule, a two-handed sword has great destructive power, but there is a high risk if the attack does not work. Moreover, with a weakened body it is difficult to resist the rapid attacks of the mantis due to the armor debuff. Then he imagined how the silhouette mocked and noted that, however, Connor uses a two-handed sword as a support, moving in such a way as to neutralize attacks, while simultaneously exploiting the weaknesses of the enemy, and all with minimal effort. Ben saw the protagonist block an attack and thought that no one could teach this, a winning strategy born of instinct and driven by an obsession with victory. He encountered an incredible talent. The old man smiled and thought that perhaps a monster mightier than him would be born. The protagonist covered himself with his sword. The mantis delivered a series of blows and shouted for the protagonist to stop hiding behind his weapon and come out. Connor looked back and thought that he now understood Ben's intention was to deal with the situation by using the weapon to the maximum. Maybe that's why he weakened it, to create a feeling of weakness. But Ben missed something. Then he looked up. Then he remembered all his opponents and added that for a man like him, who always fought from a position of weakness, making the most of everything that surrounds him is a common thing. Meki jumped on the protagonist. Then he delivered a powerful blow. Then he tore the cage. The mantis stared at the arm and shouted that it was stuck. Then he flinched hearing him tell him his right arm would be next. Connor swung his sword. Then he chopped off the other arm. Meki opened his mouth and screamed. Then he fell to the floor. The host opened his mouth and shouted that this way, oddly enough, the weakling wins. The protagonist smirked. The whole crowd began to scream. The guy opened his mouth and asked what he meant. This is the guy who beat them. The warriors looked at him and shouted that this face is definitely him, and the guy asked that they couldn't fight back against this guy, and it all ended like this. The warrior got hit in the stomach and said that actually, this guy attacked him out of nowhere. The guy started hitting him and shouted for him not to make excuses. Because of them, his dignity was undermined. Then he jerked and said to wait a minute. Then he turned and asked, this guy, does he seem familiar to them? The guy stared at the screen and asked to remind him what this guy's name is. He can't be a weakling. The man opened his mouth and said that he looked too much like someone he knows, and the warrior said that there are rumors that he communicates with that old man who cannot be identified with the rune of insight. What should they do? The man turned his gaze and said that they just have to destroy them both. The man in the cloak raised his glass and said that maybe it was not as easy as they thought. This old man Ben from the 5 heavenly stars. The man spread his arms, asked again, and heard that he was watching the match and had previously taken off his hat, which he used to hide his identity in the spectator seats. The man then introduced Ben and noted that he heard that he was traveling around the continent in search of rare treasures. There is a saying, where Ben stays for a long time, there must be treasure. The man opened his mouth, heard that the fact that he was in the Dondajiri arena, and asked what could mean that there was treasure here. Then he smiled and noted that didn't he just say that it would not be that easy to deal with Ben, but that did not mean it was impossible. The man put the glass on the table and said that strictly speaking, under normal circumstances, Ben would be invincible. Ben looked down. The guy smiled and noted that in the current situation, it was a completely different story. The building. There was a guy fighting in the arena. Tom, with a mad smile on his face, told the guy that he was very lucky to be standing in front of him in just a week. The hero calmly replied that this would be their last battle. Tom quickly threw the hero from place to place. Connor calmly replied that he had studied boxing a little in his youth. The hero quickly kicked the guy in the leg. Tom was surprised and did not know how to react to this. After a while, the guy was still lying curled up in pain in the arena. The referee started shouting loudly that the undefeated champion had fallen and now a new legend had been born in their city. The new legend was Connor, who was called a weakling. People with smiles on their faces replied that it was very interesting to watch him, since you never knew what he could do. The referee, laughing, could not believe that the guy had become a champion just a week after entering the arena. The guy asked the hero how he felt after becoming a champion. Connor looked away. The guy smiled, answering that it was time for him to retire. Hotel. The hero twirled a golden belt around himself. The buckle and the belt itself began to glow. The system windows showed that Connor now had powers that were formed in accordance with the user's requirements. Connor smiled, realizing that when he wore a mythical thing, he felt that his self-esteem also increased. A man stood next to the guy, who answered that from the expression on his face you can tell that the hero really likes all this. Ben answered that he was sorry that he could not come to the final match. The hero laughed, answering the guy that he could not become a champion in a short period of time like the guy. The hero answered that it was more than 100 years ago and that was when he first picked up a sword. Ben understood that then the situation was completely different than now, and in those days he picked up a sword only to earn a living. The hero answered that if you compare the current one, it can only be called fun. The little animal was sleeping sweetly. Ben, with a smile on his face, asked the guy if he could spare some of his time. A quiet place. The hero answered that they had arrived. It was a city of pleasures where there was a forgotten abandoned mine. Connor, with confusion, asked the guy why they had come here. The heroes walked slowly along the yacht, thinking about various questions. Connor decided to talk about the House of Death. It was a special department engaged in the production of weapons with ultra-high characteristics. There was a theory that the most powerful weapons on the continent were mainly produced there. The most outstanding master of all time lived in the House of Death. He was famous as a blacksmith who understood weapons more than any other blacksmith in history. He learned to draw because he wanted to leave a picture in which the weapons he made kill people. During his life, the blacksmith created more than 100 types of deadly weapons, so in the last years of his life, he began to create the ultimate weapon of destruction. Ben looked away, thinking that it was a fragment of a treasure map to his posthumous work. The hero thought that the fragment was broken in half. Ben calmly answered that he was trying to get energy right now. The guy calmly answered that he met the hero later. Connor was ashamed of demonstrating his power in front of Ben. The man answered that he found out how many fragments of the treasure map. The feet stepped on something. The guys looked at the hole with it. Connor understood that if it was getting brighter, someone's hand jumped out of the ground. The system window told the guy that he was in a dungeon. The monster in the dungeon was level 150. Running told the hero that he would never ask for this. Ben asked with a smile about whether he could not arrange the last week thanks to them. The hands took out the sword. The hero jumped from side to side, hiding behind the back so as not to become the main one. Connor looked at the system window in surprise, which said that they had increased their level. Ben was leaving quickly. The hero asked Connor not to die and to follow him. The monster screamed loudly. The body quickly hit something. The guys quickly ran to all of this. Connor laughed, glad that he had risen to the cancer in one go. Connor laughed, realizing that if he needed to, then you don't go out or come in. The guy began to look at the pet and the monsters. There was surprise on the guy's face. Connor looked at various powers and magics to use them later. The guy really wanted to wait. The hero decided to use it on the worm. The bird was flying in the sky. Connor looked at the sky with incomprehension. A monster appeared near the hero. Ben fought with all his might. All the heroes began to fly away. The man answered the guy not to lose his vigilance, as he could get seriously hurt. The hero laughed, answering that he had grown a lot in a week, so he had acquired new skills. The guys went to look at the embassy. The protagonist asked Ben about the fact that he was not famous for the existence of the 18th type. Connor asked the man why he did not use another one. The guy was smiling for some reason, then calmly answered that when he grew up and began to change his life, it became difficult for him to make friends, so he became better at taking. Connor calmly looked away. The hero calmly answered that there was no point in this. Cogger asked the man if he really was giving him everything for free. Ben smiled, answering that this was a search for immortals and it was just a hobby. Ben understood that the hero himself was hiding his fat. The guys looked up. Everyone walked calmly. Someone stood calmly. The door was closed. The officer asked the guy why he was selling everything. It was strange for the hero that everything came first. The guy does not understand where this could have come from. Blood was flowing from the man's nose. Connor ran up to Honor, asking him if everything was okay. The man laughed, saying it was an old disease and it didn't happen from time to time. It happened so quickly that it wasn't something to worry about. Someone called the man. The guy looked away with displeasure. Chase asked the guy with satisfaction if he had cleared the way. The hero saw and thanked everyone. The guy began to look at Tita. Chase looked at the guy, saying that he was crazy because he was stirring up trouble in the arena and careers as soon as he became a CHNM pinoff. The heroes were talking calmly among themselves. Chase asked Connor in surprise that he didn't drink. The hero calmly replied that he could see him in full growth. The hero didn't understand how it was possible not to recognize him. When the fight between his guild and Genesis began, the guild's funds were stolen. He was a traitor. Chase answered discontentedly that he would look at this door. Connor decided to calm down, since now were not the best days. The guy was interested in many topics both for college and not for him. I just want to lie down. The hero understood that now he did not have a single chance to stand against him. His mouth was slightly open. Chase left, closing the door. The man understood that Genesis was having difficulties in this city. The hero did not understand why they should worry about him. Chase did not understand what the hero was saying next to him, so that it was good. Suddenly the guys noticed something. Someone distracted the heroes. Fists removed the guy to set. Ben was screaming at the guy. Connor was asking the mercenary to calm down, as it was just a matter of time to win. The hero was screaming that he would kill him. Chase was gritting his teeth as hard as he could, saying that he would do it too. That's how this video ends. If you have sat through to the end, please don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave feedback. See you in the next video.